A millionaire abandons his little wheelchair-bound son on a road. The little boy screams tirelessly, "Don't do this, Dad." Years later, what happens is astonishing. The silver Mercedes gleamed under the scorching afternoon sun, its polished surface reflecting the desolate landscape that stretched endlessly in both directions. Inside, 10-year-old Thomas Parker gripped the leather seat with trembling hands, his heart pounding against his chest as his father's cold words echoed through the car's luxurious interior. "This is for the best," Richard Parker said, his voice devoid of emotion as he brought the vehicle to a stop. The successful businessman, dressed impeccably in his tailored suit, refused to meet his son's desperate gaze in the rearview mirror. "Please, Dad," Thomas whispered, his voice cracking. "I'll be better, I promise. I won't ask for anything else." His wheelchair sat folded in the trunk, a constant reminder of the condition that had made him, in his father's eyes, an imperfect heir to the Parker fortune. The car door opened with a soft click, and Richard stepped out, his expensive shoes kicking up small clouds of dust from the abandoned road. Without a word, he walked to the trunk, retrieved the wheelchair, and set it up with mechanical precision. Each movement was calculated, methodical, as if he were handling a business transaction rather than abandoning his only child. "Dad?" Thomas's voice grew more urgent as his father lifted him from the back seat, placing him in the wheelchair with practiced efficiency. The boy's legs, useless since birth, hung limply as he was transferred. "Dad, please don't do this. I'll try harder at school. I'll stay in my room when your friends come over. I won't embarrass you anymore." Richard adjusted his tie, a nervous habit he'd developed over years of high-stakes business meetings. But this wasn't a merger or acquisition. This was his son, pleading for love that had been withheld since the day he was born. "Someone will find you," Richard said, his words carried away by the hot wind that swept across the empty road. "The Parker name. It's not meant for—" He trailed off, unable or unwilling to complete the thought. Thomas reached out, his small hand grasping at his father's sleeve. "I'm sorry I'm not the son you wanted," he sobbed, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry Mom's not here. I'm sorry I can't walk. Please, Daddy, please don't leave me." For a moment, something flickered across Richard's face, a shadow of doubt, perhaps even pain. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the same mask of indifference he'd worn for the past decade. Without another word, he turned and walked back to the car. Thomas watched, helpless, as his father slipped behind the wheel. The engine roared to life and the Mercedes began to move. "Daddy!" he screamed, his voice raw with desperation. "Please, I'll be good. I promise I'll be good." But the car continued to shrink into the distance, leaving nothing but a trail of dust and the echo of a child's broken heart. Thomas sat alone in his wheelchair, the sun beating down mercilessly as the reality of his situation began to sink. The road stretched endlessly in both directions, empty save for the occasional tumbleweed that danced across the cracked asphalt. Hours passed, and the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Thomas's tears had dried on his cheeks, leaving salty tracks that itched in the dry air. His throat was raw from crying, and thirst began to gnaw at him. Yet he remained where his father had left him, clinging to the desperate hope that the Mercedes would reappear, that this was all some terrible test or lesson. As shadows lengthened across the landscape, the sound of an approaching vehicle broke through the oppressive silence. But it wasn't the familiar purr of his father's luxury car. Instead, it was the rumble of an old pickup truck, its faded blue paint visible through a layer of desert dust. The truck slowed as it approached, and Thomas could make out two figures in the cab. His heart raced with equal parts fear and hope as the vehicle came to a stop beside him. The passenger door opened and a woman stepped out, her face etched with concern. "Oh my God, Jim," she called to her husband. "There's a child out here all alone." She approached Thomas carefully, her weathered face kind but cautious. "Honey, are you okay? What are you doing out here by yourself?" Thomas looked up at her, then back at the empty road where his father's car had disappeared. In that moment, as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, he realized that his life would never be the same, The vast Parker mansion had always felt more like a museum than a home. In the weeks leading up to that fateful day on the desert road, Thomas had spent countless hours wheeling through its endless corridors, surrounded by priceless artwork that seemed to mock him with their perfection. Each painting, each sculpture, represented the flawless beauty his father so desperately sought in every aspect of his life. Now, as Sarah Martinez gently helped Thomas settle into her modest living room, the contrast couldn't have been more stark. The worn but comfortable couch, the family photos covering nearly every inch of wall space, the slight scent of fresh-baked bread, everything spoke of warmth and life, concepts that had been foreign in the cold marble halls of his previous existence. "You must be hungry, sweetheart," Sarah said, her voice soft and caring. She exchanged a worried glance with her husband Jim, who stood in the doorway, his weathered hands fidgeting with his worn baseball cap. "I just took some cookies out of the oven. Would you like one?" Thomas nodded slightly, his eyes fixed on a family portrait hanging above the fireplace. It showed Sarah and Jim surrounded by children of various ages, all beaming at the camera. The happiness in their faces seemed almost alien to him, a reminder of everything he'd never had. "We should call the police," Jim muttered to his wife, as she passed him on her way to the kitchen. "A child doesn't end up alone on that road by accident." Sarah placed a gentle hand on her husband's arm. "Let him eat first, Jim. Let him feel safe." She disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Thomas alone with Jim, who awkwardly settled into a nearby armchair. "Do you like baseball, son?" Jim asked, noticing Thomas's gaze drift to a collection of Little League trophies displayed on a shelf. The question, though well-intentioned, sent Thomas's mind spinning back to a particularly painful memory from just 2 weeks ago. He had been watching the Parker Industries Company baseball game from the sidelines, his wheelchair positioned in the shade of a large oak tree. His father, as always, was the star of the show, his natural athletic ability drawing admiration from employees and board members alike. During a break between innings, Thomas had wheeled himself closer to the dugout, hoping to catch his father's attention. "Dad," he had called out, waving a baseball glove he'd convinced his nurse to buy him. "Could you maybe teach me how to catch? I've been practicing with Maria, and she says I have good hand-eye coordination." Richard Parker had frozen mid-conversation with the company's vice president, his shoulders tensing visibly. Without turning around, he'd said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Not now, Thomas. Can't you see I'm in the middle of something important?" The vice president had laughed uncomfortably, and Thomas had retreated to his spot under the tree, the unused glove lying limply in his lap. That night he'd overheard his father on the phone. "It's getting worse, Mother. He keeps trying to be normal. I can't handle it anymore. The constant reminder of what happened to Elizabeth." "Son?" Jim's voice pulled Thomas back to the present. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to, but we're here to listen when you're ready." Sarah returned with a plate of chocolate chip cookies and a glass of cold milk. The simple gesture, something so normal, so maternal, made Thomas's throat tighten with emotion. When was the last time someone had brought him freshly baked cookies? His nurses and caretakers had always been professional but distant, following his father's implicit instructions to maintain emotional boundaries. "Thank you," Thomas whispered, his voice barely audible. He took a cookie with trembling hands, its warmth seeping into his cold fingers. The first bite brought tears to his eyes, not because of the taste, but because of the care it represented. "Oh, honey," Sarah murmured, sitting beside him on the couch. She reached out slowly, telegraphing her movement, and when Thomas didn't pull away, she gently wrapped an arm around his shoulders. The simple touch of comfort broke something inside him, and suddenly he was sobbing into her shoulder, years of loneliness and rejection pouring out in great, heaving gasps. Jim stood up abruptly, his face dark with anger, as he pieced together the implications of Thomas's reaction to basic kindness. "I'm calling the police," he said firmly, but Sarah caught his eye and shook her head slightly. "Tomorrow," she mouthed over Thomas's head, "let him rest tonight." As the sun set outside the Martinez's modest home, casting long shadows through the windows, Thomas gradually cried himself to sleep in Sarah's arms. It was the first time in his memory that someone had held him while he cried. the first time. He hadn't been told to man up or stop being difficult. In his last moments of consciousness, as Sarah hummed a soft lullaby and stroked his hair, Thomas realized something that his young mind couldn't quite put into words. Sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another. The first. Rays of morning sunlight filtered through the threadbare curtains of the Martinez's guest room, painting unfamiliar patterns on the wall. Thomas blinked awake, momentarily disoriented by the absence of his automated blinds and the usual morning routine of nurses and caregivers. Instead of the antiseptic silence of the Parker mansion, he heard the gentle clatter of dishes and muffled voices from somewhere below. Sarah's voice drifted up the stairs, accompanied by the aroma of coffee and something sweet baking in the oven. "Jim, we need to handle this carefully. Did you see how he responded to basic kindness last night? That child has been through things we can't even imagine." "I know, Sarah," Jim's deeper voice replied, heavy with concern. "But we can't just pretend we didn't find an abandoned child on Route 23. The authorities need to be involved." Thomas's hands gripped the worn quilt covering him, his mind racing. The authorities would mean questions, investigations, and inevitably, they would contact his father. Richard Parker's influence extended far and wide. Would he convince them that Thomas was better off in his care? Would anyone believe a 10-year-old story over that of a prominent businessman? A soft knock at the door interrupted his spiraling thoughts. "Thomas, are you awake, honey?" Sarah's voice was gentle, lacking the professional detachment he was accustomed to from his caretakers. "I've made pancakes if you're hungry." Yes, I'm awake," he responded, his voice scratchy from yesterday's crying. "But I can't." He glanced at his wheelchair, positioned just out of reach from the bed. Sarah entered the room, her face brightening with understanding. "Oh, let me help you with that. Jim and I have some experience. Our nephew Marco uses a wheelchair too. He stays with us sometimes during summer breaks." As she helped him into his chair with surprising competence, Thomas noticed photos on the dresser he hadn't seen the night before. They showed a teenage boy in a wheelchair, surrounded by laughing children, clearly part of the family rather than separate from it. "Marco teaches wheelchair basketball now," Sarah mentioned casually, adjusting Thomas's footrests with practiced ease. "He's actually coming to visit next week. Would you like to meet him?" The question caught Thomas off guard. In his previous life, interactions with other wheelchair users had been strictly limited to physical therapy sessions, always under his father's watchful, disapproving eye. The idea of someone like him living a normal, active life seemed almost impossible. Downstairs, the kitchen was a warm chaos of morning activity. Two children he recognized from the family portrait, probably around 13 and 8, were arguing good-naturedly over the last chocolate chip pancake. Jim sat at the head of the table, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed what looked like homework assignments. "Maria Carlos, this is Thomas," Sarah introduced, wheeling him to an empty space at the table. "He's going to be staying with us for a while." The children barely paused in their pancake negotiations, offering casual highs as if wheelchair-using guests were an everyday occurrence. No stares, no awkward questions, no carefully masked pity, just normal breakfast table chaos. "You teach?" Thomas asked Jim, noticing the red pen in his hand. Jim looked up, smiling. "6th grade over at Pine Grove Elementary. Been doing it for 20 years now." He paused, something flickering across his face. "Actually, we should probably discuss school for you too. You must have been enrolled somewhere before." The unfinished sentence hung in the air, heavy with implications. Thomas stared at his empty plate, memories of his previous school experiences threatening to overwhelm him. The private academies his father had chosen, where he was treated like a delicate piece of china, segregated from the other students, for his own good. "I can do normal school," he said quickly, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I mean, I'm good at math and reading. I just need help getting around sometimes." Sarah and Jim exchanged glances. "Of course you can do normal school," Jim said firmly. "Pine Grove has several students with different needs. We'll make it work." The rest of breakfast passed in a blur of new experiences. Maria showed him how she and Carlos had developed a system. For sharing the last pancake, cutting it into precisely equal portions, while Sarah quietly made note of which foods he seemed to enjoy most. It was all so normal, so family-like, that Thomas found himself waiting for the other shoe to drop. That moment came with the sound of a car door slamming outside. Jim stood up, his expression tightening. "That'll be Officer Rodriguez. Sarah, why don't you take the kids to get ready for school?" Thomas's heart began to race, but before he could panic, Sarah's hand found his shoulder. "Would you like me to stay with you while you talk to the officer? You don't have to do this alone." The words hit him like a physical force. You don't have to do this alone. How many times had he faced doctors, therapists, and school administrators, with only paid staff by his side? How many nights had he lain awake, trying to be strong because no one else would be strong for him? "Please," he whispered, his hand finding Sarah's. "Please stay." As Officer Rodriguez's footsteps approached the front door, Thomas sat straighter in his wheelchair. For the first time in his life, he wasn't facing authority figures as the perfectly polished, perfectly controlled Parker heir. He was just a boy, scared and hurting, but somehow stronger because someone was finally on his side. Officer Rodriguez's interview lasted over 2 hours, during which Thomas recounted the events that had led to his abandonment. The officer's face remained professionally neutral, but his pen pressed harder into his notepad at certain points in the story. Sarah never left Thomas's side, her steady presence anchoring him when memories threatened to overwhelm his composure. "We'll need to conduct a formal investigation," Rodriguez explained, closing his notebook. "Given the prominence of the parties involved, this will need to be handled carefully." He paused, looking directly at Thomas. "But I want you to know that what happened to you was wrong. No child deserves to be abandoned, no matter the circumstances." After the officer left, promising to return with social services representatives, Thomas felt drained. The weight of having spoken his truth out loud left him exhausted yet somehow lighter. Sarah seemed to understand without words, wheeling him to the backyard where a small garden offered a peaceful retreat. "My mother always said gardens were good for the soul," she mentioned, positioning his chair near a patch of bright yellow marigolds. "When things get too overwhelming, sometimes it helps to just sit and watch things grow." The afternoon sun warmed Thomas's face as he observed a butterfly landing on nearby flowers. In the Parker mansion's meticulously maintained gardens, insects were considered pests to be eliminated. Here they were part of the natural order, contributing to the beauty rather than detracting from it. "What's going to happen now?" he asked. Finally, his voice small against the backdrop of chirping birds and rustling leaves. Sarah took a moment before responding, her hands busy with garden tools. "Well, legally there will be investigations and hearings, but right here, right now, you're going to be part of our family for as long as you need to be. We'll take it, one day at a time." But what if he comes back? The question that had been haunting Thomas since the previous day finally escaped. What if my father decides he made a mistake? Sarah set down her trowel, turning to face him fully. "Thomas, listen to me carefully. What your father did wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, a wrong choice. And while I can't promise you exactly what will happen next, I can promise you this. Jim and I will fight for you. You're not alone anymore." The afternoon transitioned into evening, and the Martinez household fell into its normal routine. Carlos showed Thomas his collection of comic books, explaining elaborate storylines with infectious enthusiasm. Maria helped him navigate the house's layout, pointing out which areas might be tricky for his wheelchair, and suggesting solutions with the casual expertise of someone used to considering accessibility. During dinner, Jim brought up the subject of school. "I spoke with Principal Bennett today. She's excited to have you join us at Pine Grove, and we've already started arranging the necessary accommodations. Would you like to visit the campus tomorrow? See how you feel about it." The offer was presented so naturally, so different from the lengthy evaluations and special arrangements that had characterized his previous educational experiences. "Really? Just like that?" "Just like that," Jim confirmed, passing him a bowl of mashed potatoes. "Education is a right, not a privilege. We'll make whatever adjustments are needed, but you'll be treated like any other student." Later that night, as Sarah helped him prepare for bed, Thomas noticed something on the nightstand that hadn't been there the previous evening: a family photo album. "I thought you might like to learn more about us," she explained. "And maybe someday you'll want to add your own pictures to it." The simple gesture brought unexpected tears to his eyes. In the Parker mansion, photos of Thomas had been conspicuously absent from the carefully curated family galleries. His father had always claimed it was to protect their privacy, but Thomas had understood the truth. He didn't fit the perfect image Richard Parker wanted to project. "I've never been in a family album before," he admitted, his fingers tracing the worn leather cover. Sarah's hands stilled in the act of turning down his bed covers. For a moment, she seemed to be fighting back her own emotions. Then she sat on the edge of his bed, opening the album to its first page. "Well then, let me tell you about the time Carlos decided to give himself a haircut right before his kindergarten photos." As Sarah's warm voice filled the room with stories of family mishaps, achievements, and everyday moments, Thomas felt something shift inside him. The pain of his father's rejection was still there, a wound that would take time to heal. But alongside it, something new was taking root. The first tentative sprouts of belonging, nurtured by the simple act of being included in a family's story. Through the window, the same stars that had witnessed his abandonment now watched, over a different scene. A boy learning that family isn't defined by blood or perfection, but by the choice to love and accept someone exactly as they are. Pine Grove Elementary looked nothing like the prestigious private academies Thomas had attended before. Instead of imposing stone facades and manicured lawns, the building was a cheerful mix of brick and colorful murals, with children's artwork prominently displayed in every window. As Jim wheeled him up the accessible ramp to the main entrance, Thomas noticed something else different. The other students barely gave his wheelchair a second glance. Principal Bennett met them in the front office, her warm smile matching the welcoming atmosphere of her school. "Welcome to Pine Grove, Thomas. We're so excited to have you join us." She spoke directly to him, not over his head to Jim as most adults tended to do. "Mr. Martinez tells me you're quite good at math," she continued, leading them down a hallway decorated with student projects. "We have an excellent mathematics program here, and Mrs. Chen is always looking for enthusiastic students." Thomas absorbed every detail as they toured the school. The classrooms were arranged in pods, with wide doorways that easily accommodated his wheelchair. In the art room, he noticed adjustable height tables and specialized tools. "Marco, that's my nephew I told you about. He helped us design some of our accessible spaces," Jim explained proudly. The music room caught Thomas's attention in an unexpected way. Through the open door, he could see students gathered around various instruments, some sitting, some standing, all participating in their own way. A boy with arm braces was playing a modified drum set, his face lit up with joy. "Ah, you're interested in music?" Principal Bennett noticed his lingering gaze. "Mr. Rodriguez, our music teacher, believes every student can be a musician. He's quite innovative in adapting instruments to different needs." Before Thomas could respond, a bell rang, and the hallways filled with students changing classes. Instead of the careful separation he was used to, where he'd always been kept apart for his safety, he found himself in the middle of the controlled chaos. A girl with purple hair waved as she passed, calling out, "Hey, Mr. M," to Jim. A boy, on crutches, navigated the crowd with practiced ease, joking with his friends. "Would you like to start tomorrow?" Principal Bennett asked as they concluded the tour. "We've already prepared a desk for you in Mr. Martinez's class, and our staff is ready to provide any support you need." Thomas looked up at Jim, who gave him an encouraging nod. "Yes," he answered, surprising himself with his certainty. "I'd like that very much." The next morning brought a mix of anxiety and excitement. Sarah helped him choose clothes from the new wardrobe they'd purchased, simple, comfortable items so different from the formal uniforms his father had insisted upon. As they pulled up to the school, Thomas spotted Carlos waiting by the entrance with a group of friends. "Hey, Thomas," Carlos called out, waving enthusiastically. "Come meet my friends." The introduction was casual, natural. "This is Thomas. He's staying with us," Carlos explained simply, He's awesome at Space Rangers. He totally destroyed my high score last night." Just like that, Thomas found himself part of a group conversation about video games and favorite superheroes. No one asked about his wheelchair. No one treated him differently. When the bell rang, a boy named Miguel naturally fell into step beside him as they headed to class. Jim's classroom was everything Thomas hadn't known education could be. Instead of rigid rows of desks, the space was arranged in collaborative clusters. Jim taught with infectious enthusiasm, encouraging discussion and questions. When Thomas correctly solved a particularly challenging math problem, his new classmates spontaneously applauded. During music class, Mr. Rodriguez approached Thomas with genuine interest. "I hear you've never played an instrument before," he said, wheeling over a cart of various options. "Would you like to explore some possibilities? Music isn't about what you can't do, it's about discovering what you can." The teacher demonstrated different instruments, modified with adaptive accessories when needed. When Thomas expressed interest in the keyboard, Mr. Rodriguez showed him how the sustain pedal could be operated by hand instead of foot. "Music finds a way," he said with a wink. "It always finds a way." Lunch in the cafeteria could have been intimidating, but Carlos had already saved him a spot at his regular table. The conversation flowed naturally, including him in debates about the best superhero movies and plans for the upcoming school science fair. When Thomas dropped his fork, Miguel simply handed him another one. No fuss or awkward attention drawn. To the moment. In art class, Mrs. Peterson introduced him to adaptive art tools that made painting easier with his specific motor skills. "Art is about expression, not perfection," she said, helping him adjust his grip on a modified brush. "Just let the colors speak for you." By the end of the day, Thomas's head was spinning with new experiences and possibilities. As Sarah picked him up, Jim had to stay late for a staff meeting. She found him animated in a way she hadn't seen before. "And then in music class," he explained excitedly on the drive home, "Mr. Rodriguez showed me how I could play the keyboard with these special attachments. He says I have good rhythm, and maybe next week he can show me some basic chords." Tara smiled at his enthusiasm in the rearview mirror. "It sounds like you had a wonderful first day. Did anything surprise you the most?" Thomas thought for a moment, watching the familiar streets of his new neighborhood pass by. I think it was that nobody tried to make things perfect. They just made things possible." The profound simplicity of his observation hung in the air as they pulled into the driveway. For the first time in his life, Thomas had experienced education not as a carefully controlled environment designed to accommodate his limitations, but as an open invitation to explore his possibilities. The weeks at Pine Grove fell into a comfortable rhythm, each day bringing new discoveries and small victories. Thomas found himself looking forward to school, especially music class, where Mr. Rodriguez's encouragement was helping him discover talents he never knew he possessed. But it wasn't until a rainy Saturday afternoon, 3 weeks after his arrival at the Martinez home, that everything changed. Sarah was cleaning out the garage, with Thomas helping to sort through boxes of old belongings. "We're like squirrels," she laughed, opening another dusty carton. "We keep everything, swearing we'll need it someday." As she moved aside a stack of old magazines, Thomas spotted something intriguing, the worn neck of what appeared to be a guitar case protruding from behind some boxes. "What's that?" he asked, pointing. Sarah's expression softened with recognition. "Oh, that's Papa Joe's old guitar." She carefully extracted the case, laying it across Thomas's lap. "Jim's father. He used to play at all our family gatherings. The house would fill with music and everyone would sing along, even if they didn't know the words." Thomas ran his fingers over the worn leather case, fascination evident in his eyes. "What happened to him?" "He moved on to a better place a few years ago," Sarah said gently, helping Thomas open the case. "But he always said this guitar had more songs left in it, waiting for the right person to find them." The instrument inside was beautiful in its imperfection, a classic acoustic guitar with subtle wear marks that spoke of years of loving use. The wood gleamed warmly even in the garage's fluorescent lighting, and Thomas could see his reflection in its polished surface. Would you "Would you like to hold it?" Sarah asked, noticing his entranced expression. Thomas hesitated. "But I can't play it. I mean, don't you need to use your legs to hold it properly?" Sarah's eyes sparkled with that familiar look that meant she had an idea. "Wait here," she said, disappearing into the house. She returned moments later with several throw pillows. With careful adjustments, she created a support system that allowed the guitar to rest securely across Thomas's lap. "There," she said, stepping back to examine her handiwork. "Papa Joe always said music finds a way to those who need it. Maybe this is your way." Thomas tentatively touched the strings, producing a soft, discordant sound that nevertheless sent a shiver of excitement through him. It was nothing like the precise electronic notes of the keyboard in music class. This was organic, raw, alive. "I could show you a few basic things," Sarah offered. "I'm no expert, but Papa Joe taught me enough to accompany simple songs." For the next hour, Sarah demonstrated how to hold his hands, how to form basic chords. Though some positions were challenging with his specific motor skills, they discovered that by adapting the traditional techniques, Thomas could produce clear, beautiful notes. "You know," Sarah said as they worked, "Papa Joe used to say that the best music comes from the heart, not the hands. He believed every scratch and dent in this guitar added to its voice, made its story richer." As the afternoon wore on, Maria and Carlos were drawn to the garage by the sounds of practice. Instead of teasing or showing impatience with his beginners' efforts, they settled in to watch, occasionally offering encouragement or suggesting songs they knew. "Mum used to sing in the church choir," Maria shared, sitting cross-legged on a nearby box. "Maybe you two could practice together." Sarah blushed. "Oh, I haven't sung properly in years." "Please," Thomas asked, surprising himself with his eagerness. In his previous life, showing enthusiasm for anything had often led to disappointment. But here, in this garage filled with dusty treasures and family memories, he felt safe to want things. Sarah's voice, when she began to sing, was clear and warm, wrapping around Thomas's simple chord progressions like a comfortable blanket. She chose an old folk song, one with easy repetitions that allowed Thomas to anticipate the changes. As they played and sang, Jim appeared in the garage doorway, drawn by the music. His eyes grew wet as he recognized his father's guitar, but his smile was bright. Without a word, he pulled up another box and joined the impromptu audience. The rain continued to fall outside, creating a gentle percussion to accompany their practice session. Thomas's fingers were beginning to tire, unused to the string's resistance, but he didn't want to stop. Each note, however imperfect, felt like a small act of rebellion against every time he'd been told to be quiet, to not draw attention, to accept his limitations. "You know," Jim said during a break, "Papa Joe always insisted that music was the purest form of magic. It can heal hearts," he'd say, "and build bridges between souls. I never fully understood what he meant until now." Thomas looked down at the guitar in his lap, this beautiful instrument that had somehow found its way to him. In the polished wood, he caught a glimpse of his reflection again, but this time he saw something different. Not a boy defined by what he couldn't do, but an artist discovering what he could. "Could we do this again tomorrow?" he asked, hope fragile but present in his voice. Sarah smiled, exchanging a look with Jim. "I think Papa Joe's guitar has been waiting in this garage long enough. Why don't we find a proper place for it in your room?" As they carefully packed up the instrument, Thomas realized that for the first time since being left on that desert road, he wasn't thinking about his father or the life he'd lost. Instead, his mind was full of melodies, possibilities, and the warmth of belonging to a family who saw him not as a burden to bear, but as a song waiting to be sung. The social worker's arrival was announced by the crunch of tires on the Martinez's gravel driveway. Thomas was in the middle of a guitar lesson with Sarah, his fingers finally mastering the transition between C and G chords, when the doorbell rang. The sound sent his heart racing. Official visits had never brought good news in his experience. "It's okay, honey," Sarah reassured him, helping him position his wheelchair. "Ms. Thompson is here to help. She's on your side." But Thomas couldn't help noticing how she squared her shoulders as if preparing for battle. Ms. Thompson was different from the polished, intimidating social workers his father had occasionally paraded through the Parker mansion. Her suit was slightly rumpled, her curly hair escaped its professional bun, and her smile reached her eyes when she greeted Thomas. "I've been reviewing your case," she said, settling into the living room couch. "And I have to tell you, Thomas, you're very brave for speaking up about what happened." Thomas's hands twisted in his lap. Has my father said anything?" Ms. Thompson's expression tightened slightly. "Mr. Parker has retained legal counsel and issued a statement claiming there's been a misunderstanding. He says he left you in the care of a trusted employee who was supposed to meet you at that location." The lie hit Thomas like a physical blow. In his mind, he heard his father's last words again, felt the desert wind on his face as the Mercedes disappeared into the distance. Sarah's hand found his shoulder, grounding him in the present. "That's not what happened," he said, his voice stronger than he expected. "He left me there alone. He said the Parker name wasn't meant for—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "I believe you," Ms. Thompson said firmly, "and we have evidence supporting your account. The gas station security camera 3 miles down the road caught Mr. Parker's car passing through, alone, both before and after the time you were left there." Jim, who had been quietly observing from the doorway, spoke up. "What happens now?" "There will be a hearing next month," Ms. Thompson explained. "Given the high-profile nature of the case, the court wants to proceed carefully. In the meantime, Thomas will remain here with you, if that's agreeable to everyone." "Of course it is," Sarah responded immediately. "Thomas is family now." The word family sparked something in Thomas's memory. "What about my grandmother and my aunts? Do they know what happened?" Ms. Thompson consulted her notes. "We've reached out to your paternal grandmother, Mrs. Eleanor Parker. She declined to be involved at this time." Thomas nodded, unsurprised but still hurt. His grandmother had always been his father's strongest ally in maintaining the perfect Parker image. She'd been the one to suggest sending him to boarding school when he was 8, though his father had ultimately decided against it. "I have some other news, Ms. Thompson continued, her tone gentler. "We've located your maternal grandparents." The room seemed to freeze. Thomas had never known anything about his mother's family. His father had forbidden any mention of them after his mother's passing. "They live in Arizona," Ms. Thompson explained. "They've been searching for you for years. Your father's lawyers kept them from making contact, but now they very much want to meet you, only if you're comfortable, of course." Thomas felt overwhelmed by the rush of emotions. Anger at his father's deception, curiosity about this unknown family, fear of more rejection. Almost unconsciously, his hands reached for Papa Joe's guitar, which had become a source of comfort over the past weeks. Sarah noticed the gesture. "Why don't we take a break? Thomas has his first school music performance tomorrow, and he needs to practice." Ms. Thompson smiled understandingly. "Of course, we don't need to decide anything today. Just think about it, Thomas. Your maternal grandparents have written you a letter when you're ready to read it." After she left, Thomas remained quiet, absently strumming the guitar strings. The Martinez family gave him space, understanding his need to process. It wasn't until after dinner, as Sarah was helping him prepare for bed, that he finally spoke. "What if they're disappointed too? My mother's parents. What if they see me and feel the same way my father does?" Sarah sat on the edge of his bed, her face serious. "Thomas, listen to me. Your father's actions reflect on him, not on you. You are an amazing young man, talented, kind, and stronger than you know. Anyone who can't see that is missing out on knowing someone truly special." She picked up Papa Joe's guitar, which had taken up permanent residence in Thomas's room. "You know what I see when I watch you play? I see someone who doesn't give up, who finds his own way to make music even when it's challenging. That kind of determination, that's beautiful." Thomas ran his fingers over the guitar's worn surface. "When I play, it's like I can say things I don't have words for. All the scary feelings, all the sad ones, they make sense when they're music. Then maybe that's how you should meet your grandparents, by letting them see the real you, music and all. You're playing at the school concert tomorrow. Why don't we invite them to come, let them see you shine on your own terms?" The suggestion terrified and excited Thomas in equal measure. The thought of performing was already nerve-wracking. He'd only been playing for a few weeks. But there was something appealing about meeting his mother's parents in a moment when he felt strong, doing something he loved. "Will you help me practice one more time?" he asked Sarah. "I want to get it perfect." Sarah smiled, helping him position the guitar. "Remember what Papa Joe always said, perfect is boring. Real music comes from the heart." As they worked on his performance piece, a simple but moving arrangement of Amazing Grace that Mr. Rodriguez had helped him adapt, Thomas felt his anxiety about tomorrow beginning to transform into determination. For the first time in his life, he would face his family not as the disappointing heir to the Parker fortune, but as himself, a boy who had found his voice through music. The Pine Grove Elementary Auditorium buzzed with excitement on the evening of the music showcase. Proud parents filled the seats, cameras at the ready, while nervous performers practiced last-minute runs backstage. Thomas sat in his wheelchair near the edge of the stage, Papa Joe's guitar across his lap, trying to remember Sarah's breathing exercises. Mr. Rodriguez approached, adjusting the microphone stand to the perfect height for Thomas's performance. "How are you feeling, Maestro?" he asked, his warm smile helping to calm Thomas's nerves. "A little scared," Thomas admitted. "What if I mess up? What if they don't like it? You know what I think, Mr. Rodriguez knelt beside him. "I think music isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest. And you, my friend, have one of the most honest hearts I've ever met." From his position, Thomas could see the Martinez family in the front row, Jim filming with their old video camera, Sarah mouthing, "You've got this," Carlos and Maria holding up a homemade sign decorated with music notes. But his eyes kept drifting to the empty seats they'd reserved, wondering if his maternal grandparents would actually come. The showcase began with the elementary school band, followed by several solo performances. Thomas listened to his classmates play, each bringing their own unique style to their chosen pieces. Miguel performed a spirited trumpet solo, and even though he missed a few notes, his enthusiasm made the audience smile and clap along. As his turn approached, Thomas felt his heart racing. Then, just as Mr. Rodriguez was about to announce his name, movement at the back of the auditorium caught his attention. An older couple was being shown to the reserved seats, the woman's silver hair gleaming under the lights, the man's weathered face bearing a hesitant expression. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Rodriguez's voice carried through the speakers, "please welcome Thomas Parker, performing his own arrangement of Amazing Grace." Sarah had helped him wheel onto the stage earlier, positioning him where the spotlight would catch the natural wood grain of Papa Joe's guitar. Now, as all eyes turned to him, Thomas took a deep breath and looked at his guitar instead of the audience. His fingers found the first chord, muscle memory taking over despite his nerves. The notes rang out clear and true, filling the auditorium with their simple beauty. Thomas had practiced this arrangement countless times, but tonight it felt different, more meaningful, more personal. As he played, he dared to glance at his grandparents. His grandmother, his mother's mother, had her hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. His grandfather sat rigid, his expression unreadable in the dim light. The melody flowed from his fingers, each note carrying emotions he couldn't express in words. The pain of abandonment, the joy of finding a new family, the hope of connections yet to be made. When he reached the final verse, Thomas did something he hadn't planned. He began to sing. His voice wasn't powerful or trained, but it was sincere. Sarah had been helping him practice in secret, showing him how to project from his diaphragm despite his physical challenges. The words took on new meaning as he sang them. "Through many dangers, toils and snares I have already come. 'Tis grace that brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home." The last note faded into silence. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Then from the silence erupted into thunderous applause. The entire auditorium rose to their feet, led by Carlos and Maria, who were practically jumping with excitement. But Thomas barely registered the standing ovation. His eyes were fixed on his maternal grandparents, who were both openly weeping now. As Mr. Rodriguez helped wheel him off stage, Thomas could hear snippets of conversation from the audience. Incredible. Such emotion. Who taught him to play like that? The praise felt surreal, like it was happening to someone else. His hands were still shaking from the adrenaline of performing. Backstage, the Martinez family surrounded him with hugs and congratulations. "That was amazing," Carlos exclaimed, practically bouncing. "You didn't tell us you were going to sing too." "I wasn't sure I would," Thomas admitted, still breathless from the performance. "It just felt right in the moment." Sarah knelt beside his wheelchair, her eyes glistening with proud tears. "Your voice was beautiful, honey, and did you see? They came." Before Thomas could respond, Mr. Rodriguez appeared with a gentle smile. "Thomas, there are some people who would very much like to meet you if you're ready." Thomas's heart began racing again, but this time it wasn't stage fright. He looked at Sarah, who squeezed his hand reassuringly. "We'll be right here if you need us." His maternal grandparents were waiting in the music room away from the crowd. His grandmother, he didn't even know her name yet, had his mother's eyes according to the few photographs he'd managed to see over the years. His grandfather stood tall but gentle, his weathered face marked by years of emotion. "Thomas," his grandmother breathed, taking a hesitant step forward. "You look so much like Elizabeth, like your mother." The comparison startled him. No one had ever told him that before. His father had always changed the subject whenever Thomas asked about his mother's appearance. "I'm Grace," his grandmother continued, her voice tender. "And this is your grandfather, Robert. We've waited so long to meet you." "Why?" Thomas's voice caught. He gripped the armrests of his wheelchair, forcing himself to continue. "Why didn't you try to find me before?" Robert stepped forward, his expression pained. "We did, son. For years we tried. Your father's lawyers blocked every attempt. We wrote letters, hired investigators, filed court petitions, but Richard Parker's influence, and it was like fighting a brick wall. We never stopped thinking about you," Grace added, moving closer but still maintaining a respectful distance. "We knew about your condition. Elizabeth had complications during pregnancy that indicated, but we didn't care. We just wanted to know our grandson." Thomas absorbed this information, his mind racing. Did you know my mother well?" The question came out smaller than he intended, vulnerable in a way he rarely allowed himself to be. Grace's hand flew to her heart. "Oh, sweetheart. Would you like to hear about her? The real her, not just what you've been told?" Thomas nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. "Your mother was a musician too," Grace revealed, gesturing to a chair. "May I sit?" At Thomas's nod, she settled close to him. She played the piano and sang in the church choir. She had this amazing laugh that could fill a room with joy. And she was so excited about having you. She used to play music for you before you were born. "She did?" Thomas had never heard these stories before. His father had kept his mother's memory locked away like a painful secret. "She had such dreams for you," Robert added, his voice rough with emotion. "Not about you being perfect or successful in business. She just wanted you to be happy, to find what you love and pursue it with passion, just like we saw you do tonight." "The way you played that hymn," Grace continued, wiping fresh tears. "It was like hearing her spirit again. She used to arrange hymns too, adding her own special touch to make them new." The revelation hit Thomas like a physical force. His musical inclination wasn't random. It was a connection to the mother he'd never known, a hereditary gift he'd only just discovered. "Would you—" He hesitated, then gathered his courage. "Would you tell me more about her? Everything." Grace and Robert exchanged glances filled with years of stored-up love and stories waiting to be shared. "We brought photo albums," Grace said, "and home videos. We've kept everything, hoping someday we'd have the chance to share them with you." "But only if you want," Robert added quickly. "We know this is a lot to take in. We don't want to overwhelm you." Thomas looked toward the door where he knew the Martinez family was waiting, giving him space but ready to support him if needed. Then he looked back at his grandparents, seeing in their faces the missing pieces of his own history. "I want to know everything," he decided. "But can my family stay too? The Martinezes, they've become my family too." Grace's smile was radiant through her tears. "Of course they can. Family isn't about choosing sides, Thomas. It's about making room in your heart for all the love that's offered." As Sarah and Jim were invited in, bringing with them the warm presence that had become Thomas's safety net, he felt something shift inside him. The music he'd played tonight had opened more than just the audience's hearts. It had opened a faucet to his past that he'd thought forever closed. Mr. Rodriguez appeared briefly in the doorway, carrying Papa Joe's guitar. "I thought you might want this," he said, carefully placing it across Thomas's lap. "Sometimes music can say things that words can't." Looking at the instrument that had become his voice, surrounded by two families that loved him in different, but equally valid ways, Thomas felt truly whole for the first time in his life. The days following the school concert took on a dreamlike quality. Thomas found himself surrounded by a whirlwind of stories, photographs, and memories of the mother he'd never known. Grace and Robert had rented a small house nearby, unwilling to miss another moment of their grandson's life. "Look at this one," Grace said, carefully turning a page in one of the many photo albums spread across the Martinez's dining room table. "This was Elizabeth at your age, sitting at her first piano recital. She was so nervous, she almost ran off stage." Thomas studied the photograph intently. The young girl in the image shared his dark curls and determined expression. "What happened? Did she play?" "Oh, she played all right," Robert chuckled. "She said she heard the music in her head and just had to let it out, nervous or not. She won. First place that day." Sarah, who had been quietly preparing lunch nearby, smiled at the story. "That sounds familiar. Thomas does the same thing with Papa Joe's guitar. Once he starts playing, it's like the rest of the world disappears." The mention of the guitar prompted Grace to share another memory. "Elizabeth wrote songs too, you know. We found notebooks, full of them afterward. Would you like to see them?" Thomas nodded eagerly. Each new detail about his mother felt like a precious gift, filling in the blank spaces in his heart. Robert retrieved a worn leather journal from their collection of memorabilia, handling it with reverent care. "This was her favorite songwriting notebook," he explained, placing it carefully on Thomas's lap. "She wrote everything in here, lyrics, melodies, even little notes about her day." The pages were filled with his mother's flowing handwriting, musical notes dancing across staff lines, fragments of poems and thoughts scattered between compositions. Thomas ran his fingers over the words, feeling a connection to the woman who had written them. "There's something else we wanted to show you," Grace said softly, exchanging a meaningful look with Robert. "We weren't sure when the right time would be, but Elizabeth made a recording just before you were born." The room grew quiet as Robert pulled out an old USB drive. Jim, who had been grading papers in the corner, quickly offered his laptop. As they gathered around the computer, Thomas felt his heart racing with anticipation. The video began playing, showing a young woman seated at a piano. Her belly was swollen with pregnancy, and her face glowed with joy as she looked at the camera. "Hi, little one," she said, her voice clear and musical. "I don't know if you'll be a boy or a girl, but I already know you'll be perfect exactly as you are." Thomas couldn't breathe. This was his mother, not a faded photograph or someone else's memory, but real and alive, speaking words meant just for him. "I wanted to record this song for you," Elizabeth continued on the screen. "I wrote it thinking about all the adventures we'll have together, all the love I already feel for you. Whatever challenges life brings, remember that you are loved, completely and unconditionally." Her fingers touched the piano keys and a melody filled the room, sweet, simple, and full of hope. As she played, she sang words that seemed to bridge the years between then and now. "My love for you is like the stars above, always there, even when hidden from view, no matter where life leads you to. Remember, I believe in you." The recording ended, freezing on Elizabeth's smiling face. Thomas realized he was crying, but for once they weren't tears of sadness or loss. Sarah's arm wrapped around his shoulders, while Grace held his hand tightly. "She would be so proud of you," Robert said, his voice rough with emotion. "Not because of your music, though that's incredible, but because of who you are, your strength, your kindness, your resilience. Could—" Thomas hesitated, then pressed on. "Could you teach me her song, the one she wrote for me?" Grace's face lit up. "Of course, we have all her sheet music. We could transpose it for guitar, help you adapt it to your style. And maybe," Sarah added gently, "you could write your own verse to add to it. Make it a duet across time." The idea resonated deeply with Thomas. Music had already given him a voice to express his feelings. Now it was giving him a way to connect with his mother, to continue the conversation she had started before he was born. That evening, as the combined families worked together to prepare dinner, Thomas sat with Papa Joe's guitar, experimenting with his mother's melody. The song was like a bridge, connecting his past to his present, helping him understand that love, like music, never really dies. It just changes form, finding new ways to be heard. The legal notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, its official letterhead stark against the cheerful clutter of the Martinez's kitchen table. Jim read it first, his face darkening as his eyes scanned the page. Sarah peered over his shoulder, her hand flying to her mouth in distress. "What is it?" Thomas asked, already knowing from their expressions that something was wrong. He'd been practicing his mother's song, making notes for his own additional verse, when the certified mail carrier had interrupted their peaceful morning. Jim and Sarah exchanged worried glances before Jim cleared his throat. Richard Parker's lawyers have filed a motion for immediate custody reinstatement. They're claiming temporary emotional distress led to a misunderstanding, and that he's now prepared to resume his parental duties. Thomas's fingers tightened on the guitar strings, producing a discordant twang that seemed to echo his inner turmoil. "He wants me back." "No, honey," Sarah said quickly, moving to his side. "He wants control back. There's a difference." "Ms. Thompson arrived within the hour, her usually neat appearance slightly disheveled, suggesting she'd dropped everything to come when she heard the news. "I need you all to stay calm," she said, spreading documents across the kitchen table. "This is a typical legal maneuver in high-profile cases. Mr. Parker's legal team is trying to control the narrative. But they can't just take him, right?" Maria asked from the doorway, where she and Carlos had been listening. The siblings had become fiercely protective of Thomas, treating him like he'd always been their brother. "Not without a hearing, Ms. Thompson assured them, "and we have strong evidence supporting Thomas's account of events. However," she hesitated, looking at Thomas with concern, "they're requesting that Thomas undergo a psychological evaluation." The words hit him like a physical blow. He remembered the countless therapists and specialists his father had paraded him in front of over the years, always searching for ways to fix him or make him more normal. "I don't want to," he whispered, his voice shaking. "They always twist everything I say." Grace and Robert, who had been called immediately, arrived just then. Grace's face was tight with controlled anger. "They can't do this to him again. Elizabeth would never have wanted—" "Actually," Miss Thompson interrupted gently, "this might be our opportunity. Thomas, if you're willing, we could request Dr. Marina Chen conduct the evaluation. She's highly respected in family court and known for her advocacy for children with disabilities." Thomas looked uncertainly at Sarah, who had become his anchor in moments of doubt. She smiled encouragingly. "It's your choice, honey. Whatever you decide, we're all here for you." Taking a deep breath, Thomas wheeled himself to the living room window. Outside, the garden Sarah had helped him plant was beginning to bloom, tiny sprouts pushing through the soil toward the sun. Like those plants, he had begun to grow in new directions since finding his place with the Martinez family and reconnecting with his maternal grandparents. "If I do this," he said finally, turning back to face his support system, "I want to do it my way, not just answering questions in some office." Ms. Thompson leaned forward, intrigued. "What did you have in mind?" "I want to show Dr. Chen who I really am, not just talk about it." His hand found Papa Joe's guitar again, drawing comfort from its familiar presence. "I want her to see me at school with my friends playing music. I want her to understand that I'm not broken. I'm just different from what my father wanted me to be." A slow smile spread across Ms. Thompson's face. "That's actually a brilliant approach. It would give Dr. Chen a comprehensive view of your life now, not just a snapshot in a clinical setting." "And," Robert added, his eyes twinkling, "she should hear Elizabeth's song, the one you're working on adapting." Thomas nodded, feeling stronger as the plan took shape. "I want her to see that I have a real family now. Maybe not the kind that looks good in Parker Industries promotional photos, but one that loves me for who I am." Sarah wrapped her arms around him from behind, her voice thick with emotion. "Oh, sweetheart, you've come so far from that scared boy we found on the roadside." The rest of the morning was spent making arrangements. Ms. Thompson made calls to set up the evaluation, while Grace and Robert shared stories about Elizabeth's own struggles with the Parker family's rigid expectations. Jim and Sarah provided documentation of Thomas's progress at school, and Carlos and Maria insisted on creating a video compilation of their favorite moments with their new brother. As the adults discussed legal strategies, Thomas retreated to the garage, his favorite practice space, with Papa Joe's guitar. The song he was working on, combining his mother's melody with his own experiences, felt more important than ever now. It wasn't just music anymore. It was evidence of his journey, proof that he had found his voice despite everything that had tried to silence him. Through the garage window, he could see the Martinez's old pickup truck parked beside Grace and Robert's rental car. 2 different vehicles, 2 different families, but both part of the convoy that had helped transport him from darkness into light. As he began to play, working on the bridge between his mother's verse and his own, Thomas realized something profound. Sometimes the best defense isn't hiding who you are, but showing it more clearly than ever. Dr. Marina Chen didn't look anything like the stern specialists Thomas remembered from his past. She arrived at Pine Grove Elementary, wearing a bright scarf decorated with musical notes and carrying a worn leather messenger bag instead of a clinical briefcase. Her smile was genuine as she greeted Thomas in Mr. Rodriguez's music room. "So, Thomas," she said, settling into a chair while he positioned his wheelchair near the piano, Papa Joe's guitar across his lap. "Ms. Thompson tells me you wanted to show rather than just tell. I think that's a wonderful idea." The music room had become Thomas's sanctuary over the past months. Mr. Rodriguez had helped him set up a special practice area where he could easily reach his instruments and music sheets. The walls were covered with student artwork inspired by different songs, including a painting Thomas had created while listening to his mother's composition. "I thought," Thomas began, his voice steady despite his nerves, "that maybe you could see a normal day for me, not just me talking about it." Dr. Chen nodded encouragingly. "Lead the way." The morning unfolded naturally, starting with Thomas's math class. Dr. Chen observed from the back as he participated in group work, solving equations with his classmates. She noted how the other students included him automatically, adjusting their positions to accommodate his wheelchair without making a fuss. During lunch, she watched him joke with Carlos and Maria, sharing food and stories like any other kid. When he dropped his fork, Miguel handed him another one without interrupting his story about the latest superhero movie. "They're not just being nice because you're here," Thomas explained as they moved to his afternoon classes. "It took time, but they see me now, not just the chair." Art class was particularly revealing. Mrs. Peterson had adapted tools and techniques to work with Thomas's abilities, but she never lowered her expectations. His current project, a multimedia piece incorporating sheet music from his mother's journal, showed remarkable creativity and skill. "Tell me about this piece," Dr. Chen asked, studying the artwork thoughtfully. "It's about connection," Thomas explained, pointing out different elements. "See these musical notes? They're from my mom's song, and these colors, they represent my families. The blues for the Martinezes, the greens for my grandparents, they all flow together like harmony in music." The day's observations culminated in the music room, where Thomas had prepared something special. Mr. Rodriguez helped set up the recording, equipment they'd been using to document Thomas's progress with his mother's song. "Before I play," Thomas said, his hand resting on the guitar, "I want you to hear something." He nodded to Mr. Rodriguez, who played the video of Elizabeth at the piano, singing her song for her unborn child. Dr. Chen watched intently, her eyes moving between the young woman on the screen and the boy before her. When the recording ended, she wiped away a tear. "That was beautiful, Thomas. Did you know your mother?" "Not until recently," he answered honestly. "My father, he never talked about her, but now I have her music, her journals, and I'm learning who she was through her parents, my grandparents. And how does that make you feel? Thomas considered the question carefully. Like I found a missing piece of myself. My father always made me feel wrong, broken. But my mom, in her song, she already loved me exactly as I am, and now I have two families who feel the same way. He positioned his fingers on the guitar strings. I've been working on her song, adding my own part to it. Would you like to hear it? Dr. Chen nodded, settling back to listen. Thomas began to play, starting with his mother's melody. The familiar notes filled the room, but then the music shifted, incorporating new elements. Where Elizabeth's portion had been full of anticipation and hope, Thomas's addition spoke of resilience and discovery. The two parts intertwined, creating something entirely new, yet connected to its origins. As the last notes faded, Thomas looked up to find not only Dr. Chen watching, but Sarah, Jim, Grace, and Robert standing in the doorway. They had arrived for the parent portion of the evaluation, only to find themselves witness to this moment of musical testimony. Thomas, Dr. Chen said softly, I've been doing these evaluations for 20 years. Most children try to tell me what they think I want to hear, but you've shown me who you really are, and who you are is remarkable. She began packing up her notes, but paused to add, your mother's song was about the love she already had for you. Your addition to it shows the love you've found for yourself. That's not something any court document can measure. As the adults moved to Jim's office to complete the formal interview portions, Thomas remained in the music room, his fingers still resting on the guitar strings. Through the window, he could see students leaving for the day, their normal afternoon routines continuing, regardless of evaluations or court cases. A sense of peace settled over him. For the first time since receiving the legal notice, he wasn't afraid. He had shown his truth, not through carefully prepared statements or coached responses, but through the language that had become his own: music. Sarah poked her head back into the room. You okay, honey? Need anything? Thomas smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. No, I'm good. Actually, I think I just figured out the ending for my part of the song, because that's what his life had become. Not an ending dictated by abandonment and rejection, but a new composition, created note by note, supported by the love of two families and the enduring spirit of a mother who had loved him before. She even knew him. Dr. Chen's evaluation report arrived on a bright spring morning, coinciding with an unexpected visitor to Pine Grove Elementary. Thomas was in the middle of music class, working with Mr. Rodriguez on the final arrangements of his mother's song, when Principal Bennett appeared at the door with a distinguished-looking woman in a tailored suit. Mr. Rodriguez, Thomas, Principal, Bennett said, her smile warm but slightly nervous. This is Ms. Diana Foster, from the National Youth Music Foundation. She was in the audience at our school showcase last month. Thomas's hands stilled on the guitar strings as Ms. Foster stepped forward. Her presence commanded attention, but her eyes were kind as she addressed him directly. Thomas, your performance, that night was extraordinary. The way you adapted Amazing Grace showed remarkable musicality, especially for someone so young. Mr. Rodriguez beamed with pride. Thomas has a natural gift, and he's been working on an original piece that's even more impressive. Ms. Foster's eyebrows raised with interest. An original composition. Would you be willing to share it? Thomas hesitated, looking at Mr. Rodriguez for guidance. The song he'd been working on, his mother's melody interwoven with his own additions, felt intensely personal. He'd only performed it completely for Dr. Chen during the evaluation. It's your choice, Mr. Rodriguez said gently, but sometimes sharing our most personal music is how we connect with others who need to hear it. Taking a deep breath, Thomas nodded. It's a song my mother wrote before I was born. I found it recently, and I've been adding my own part to it. As he began to play, the familiar notes of his mother's melody filled the music room. The love and hope in her composition flowed through his fingers, leading into the bridge he'd created, the part where her voice from the past met his present. When he reached his own addition, the music transformed, carrying the weight of his experiences but also the joy of discovery and belonging. The last note hung in the air for a moment before Ms. Foster spoke. That was remarkable. The emotional depth the technical skill in blending two distinct voices while maintaining their individual integrity. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Thomas, the foundation is organizing a special concert series called New Voices, New Visions. It features young musicians who bring unique perspectives to their art. We would be honored if you would consider performing. Thomas's heart raced. You mean on a real stage? At the Central City Concert Hall, Ms. Foster confirmed. The foundation specifically seeks to highlight artists who demonstrate that music transcends physical limitations. Your performance would inspire others to see possibilities rather than obstacles. Before Thomas could respond, Principal Bennett interjected. Of course, we'd need to discuss this with his family and legal guardians, given the current circumstances. Ms. Foster looked confused, but didn't press for details. Instead, she handed Thomas a formal invitation. The concert is in 3 weeks. Take some time to think about it. Discuss it with your family. We'd provide any accommodations you need, and you'd have access to our professional recording studio for rehearsals. After she left, Thomas sat in silence, the invitation trembling slightly in his hands. Mr. Rodriguez pulled up a chair beside him. What are you thinking? I want to do it, Thomas said slowly. But what if my father tries to stop it? What if he uses it against me in court somehow? Then we make sure Dr. Chen's report reaches the judge first, came Sarah's voice from the doorway. She had arrived for her regular lunch visit, catching the end of the conversation. Speaking of which, she held up an official-looking envelope. Thomas wheeled over quickly. Is that... Sarah nodded, sitting down to open the report. As she read, her eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. Oh, Thomas, she understood. She really understood. The report detailed Dr. Chen's observations, describing Thomas as a remarkably resilient young man who has found his voice through music and the support of a loving extended family. She specifically noted how the Martinez family and his maternal grandparents had created an environment where Thomas could thrive, contrasting it with the emotionally restrictive and potentially harmful atmosphere of his previous life. Most importantly, she strongly recommended against Richard Parker's petition for custody reinstatement, citing Thomas's extraordinary progress in his current situation and the clear evidence of emotional neglect in his former home. So, they can't make me go back? Thomas asked, hardly daring to hope. The judge still has to make the final decision, Sarah explained gently. But Dr. Chen's recommendation carries a lot of weight. And now, she picked up the invitation from the Music Foundation. Maybe it's time to show the world who you really are on your own terms. Thomas ran his fingers over the embossed lettering on the invitation. The concert would take place just days after the scheduled court hearing. I want to play my mum's song, he said firmly. Both parts, hers and mine, and I want everyone there, you and Jim, Carlos and Maria, Grace and Robert, even my father if he comes. Sarah's eyes widened slightly at the last part, but she understood. This wasn't about seeking approval anymore, it was about showing truth through music. Then that's what we'll do, she said simply. One step at a time, one note at a time. As they left the music room for lunch, Thomas caught his reflection in the window. The scared, silent boy from the Parker mansion was gone. In his place was someone new, someone who had found his voice not despite his challenges, but through them. The Central City Concert Hall's recording studio was unlike anything Thomas had ever seen. State-of-the-art equipment lined the walls, and the acoustic panels created a sound quality that made Papa Joe's guitar sing like never before. But what truly amazed him was how the staff had adapted everything to make it accessible for him. We adjusted the microphone heights and monitor angles based on your specifications, the sound engineer Dave explained. He was a tall man with kind eyes and a patient demeanor. And we've set up this special mixing board that you can control. From your position, want to try it? Thomas spent the next hour learning how to adjust his own sound levels, fascinated by the technology that allowed him to have complete control over his performance. Grace and Robert watched from the observation room, their faces glowing with pride. Elizabeth would have loved this, Grace whispered to Sarah, who had become like a sister to her over the past months. She always said music studios were like sacred spaces where magic happens. The rehearsal schedule was intense, but Thomas approached it with determination. Between sessions, he continued his schoolwork, with teachers sending assignments to the studio. His classmates, led by Carlos and Maria, had created a countdown calendar to the concert, decorating it with musical notes and encouraging messages. During one particularly challenging rehearsal, as Thomas struggled with a complex transition between his mother's melody and his own composition, Miss Foster shared something unexpected. "You know, Thomas, we received an interesting call yesterday," she said during a break. "A reporter from the Central City Tribune heard about your upcoming performance. She's interested in doing a feature story about you and your musical journey." Thomas's hand stilled on the guitar strings. "What kind of story?" "That would be up to you," Miss Foster assured him quickly. "You're under no obligation, of course." But she seemed genuinely interested in how music has helped you express yourself and connect with your mother's legacy. Sarah, who had been helping adjust Thomas's sheet music, looked concerned. Given the pending legal situation, "Actually," Thomas interrupted, an idea forming, "maybe this is good timing. Dr. Chen said in her report that I need to be heard, right? Maybe this is another way to make sure my voice isn't ignored." The reporter, Jenny Chen, no relation to Dr. Chen, visited the studio the next day. She was younger than Thomas expected, with a notebook full of thoughtful questions that went beyond the obvious. "Tell me about this guitar," she asked, gesturing to Papa Joe's instrument. "I notice you treat it with special care." Thomas smiled, running his hand along the worn wood. "It belonged to my adoptive grandfather. I never met him, but his guitar found me when I needed it most, just like his family did." As the interview continued, Thomas found himself opening up about things he'd never discussed publicly before. The years of isolation in the Parker mansion, the day of abandonment, and most importantly, the healing power of music and unconditional love. "And now you're preparing for your debut at the concert hall," Jenny noted, her pen moving quickly across her notebook. "How does that feel?" Thomas considered the question carefully. "It feels like coming full circle. My mother wrote her part of the song hoping I would find my way in the world. Now I'm adding my voice to hers, showing that her hope wasn't wasted." After the interview, as the family was packing up for the day, Mr. Rodriguez arrived with an unexpected delivery, a professional recording of Thomas's mother's original performance, digitally remastered from the old video. "I thought," he said with a smile, "that maybe we could incorporate parts of her actual voice into your performance, a true duet across time." The idea brought tears to everyone's eyes, but Thomas's smile was radiant. For the next several hours, they experimented with different ways to blend Elizabeth's recorded voice with Thomas's live performance. The result was magical, a conversation between mother and son, bridging past and present through music. As they finally prepared to leave the studio that evening, Dave called Thomas back for a moment. "I've worked with a lot of musicians," he said seriously, "but what you're creating here, it's something special. It's not just music, it's truth set to melody." In the car ride home, Thomas was unusually quiet, processing the day's events. Sarah caught his eye in the rearview mirror. "Penny, for your thoughts?" "I was just thinking," he said slowly, "about how scared I used to be of being seen. My father always wanted to hide me away, like I was something shameful. But now you're choosing to be seen," Sarah finished gently. "On your own terms." Thomas nodded, his hand resting on the guitar case beside him. The concert was just over 2 weeks away, with the court hearing scheduled for the week before. But somehow, the timing felt right. Whatever happened in court, he would have his moment on stage, a chance to show the world and maybe even his father that being different wasn't the same as being wrong. That night, as he practiced in his room one last time before bed, Thomas added a new element to the song, a subtle echo of strength that hadn't been there before. Because now he understood that his mother's love hadn't just been about accepting him as he was, it had been about believing in who he could become. The courthouse loomed before them, its stone facade casting long shadows in the early morning light. Thomas sat in his wheelchair, wearing the new suit Sarah had carefully picked out, professional but comfortable, allowing him to be himself while still showing respect for the proceedings. Papa Joe's guitar was safely at home. Today wasn't. About music, but about speaking his truth in another way. "Remember," Miss Thompson said, kneeling beside him as they waited to enter, "you only have to tell your story. Judge Watson is known for really listening to children in family cases. Just be honest about what you feel." The Martinez family and his maternal grandparents gathered around him protectively. They had all dressed formally for the occasion, but Thomas could see the worry lines around their eyes. The article about his musical journey had appeared in the Tribune that morning, and though they'd all agreed it was beautifully written, its timing added another layer of tension to the day. "He's here," Carlos whispered suddenly, spotting a familiar Mercedes pulling into the parking lot. Thomas's heart began to race as Richard Parker emerged from the car, accompanied by two attorneys. His father looked older than Thomas remembered, the lines in his face deeper, his usual commanding presence somehow diminished. For a moment, their eyes met across the courthouse steps. Richard Parker froze, his hand tightening on his briefcase. This was the first time they'd seen each other since that day on the desert road. Thomas felt Sarah's hand squeeze his shoulder gently, grounding him in the present moment. Inside the courtroom, Thomas was surprised by how small it felt. Judge Watson, a woman with silver hair and intelligent eyes, looked up from her papers. As they entered, "Given the sensitive nature of this case and Thomas's age, I'd like to speak with him privately in my chambers first," she announced. Thomas looked at Sarah in panic, but Ms. Thompson nodded encouragingly. "This is good," she whispered. "Judge Watson wants to hear your voice without any pressure from either side." The judge's chambers were warmer than the courtroom, with photographs, of children and families on the walls. As Thomas wheeled in, he noticed a small wheelchair ramp had been installed beside the judge's desk. "I had that put in years ago," Judge Watson said, following his gaze. "My granddaughter uses a chair too. Now, Thomas, I've read Dr. Chen's report, and I've seen the article about your music, but I'd like to hear from you directly. What do you want?" The directness of the question caught Thomas off guard. Adults usually talked around him, not to him. He took a deep breath, remembering what Mr. Rodriguez always said about finding your authentic voice. "I want to stay with the Martinezes," he said clearly. They see me, all of me. Not just the chair, not just the things I can't do. They help me find ways to do things differently, not just tell me I can't do them at all." Judge Watson nodded, making notes. "And your maternal grandparents? How do you feel about having them in your life now?" "They give me pieces of my mom I never had before," Thomas explained, his voice growing stronger. "They show me that she would have loved me exactly as I am. And they work together with the Martinezes. It's like having two families who care about what's best for me, not just what looks best." "And your father?" the judge asked gently. Thomas's hands twisted in his lap. He wanted a different son. Someone who could be exactly what he planned. When I couldn't be that, he left me on that road. Not because he was upset or not thinking clearly. He drove me there on purpose. He told me the Parker name wasn't meant for someone like me. That must have been very painful to hear. "It was," Thomas acknowledged. "But now I know that's about him, not me. My mother wrote me a song before I was born, saying she would love me no matter what. The Martinezes and my grandparents show me that love every day. I don't need to change who I am anymore. I just need to be allowed to grow into who I'm meant to be." Judge Watson set down her pen, studying Thomas thoughtfully. "You seem very clear about what you want." "I am," Thomas said firmly. "I have a concert coming up at the Central City Concert Hall. I'm playing my mother's song with my own addition to it. I want my father to come, not because I need his approval anymore, but because I want him to see who I really am, even if he still doesn't understand." Something flickered in Judge Watson's eyes. Approval, perhaps, or recognition of the strength it took to make such a statement. "Thank you, Thomas. You've given me a lot to think about. Shall we rejoin the others?" Back in the courtroom, Thomas wheeled into position between his two families. Richard Parker sat stiffly on the other side, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the worn comfort of Jim's best jacket or Robert's carefully pressed shirt. As Judge Watson took her seat, Thomas felt a strange calm settle over him. Whatever happened next, he had spoken his truth. Like the notes of his mother's song, some truths couldn't be denied once they were finally heard. Judge Watson's voice filled the courtroom with quiet authority as she delivered her ruling. Having reviewed all evidence, including Dr. Chen's comprehensive evaluation, and after speaking directly with Thomas, I am prepared to make my decision. The tension in the room was palpable. Sarah held Thomas's hand tightly, while Grace and Robert leaned forward in their seats. Across the aisle, Richard Parker maintained his rigid posture, but his hands trembled slightly as they gripped the table before him. "Mr. Parker," the judge addressed Richard directly, "when we become parents, we accept our children as gifts, not projects. They come to us as they are, with their own unique qualities and challenges. Our job is to nurture their growth, not force them into predetermined molds." She lifted Dr. Chen's report. "The evidence clearly shows that Thomas has flourished in his current environment. His academic performance has improved, he has developed healthy social relationships, and most importantly, he has found his voice, both literally and metaphorically, through music and the support of a loving extended family." Thomas felt his heart racing as Judge Watson continued. Furthermore, the documented incident of abandonment shows a disturbing lack of regard for Thomas's well-being. This was not, as your lawyers suggest, a moment of emotional distress. It was a calculated action that put a child's life at risk. Richard Parker's face had grown pale, but he remained silent as the judge delivered her verdict. "Therefore, I am denying the petition for custody reinstatement. Full legal guardianship will remain with the Martinez family, with continued liberal visitation rights for Thomas's maternal grandparents." A collective exhale seemed to sweep through Thomas's side of the courtroom. Carlos and Maria, sitting behind him, had to be shushed by Jim as they started to celebrate. "However," Judge Watson added, looking directly at Thomas, "I have one additional ruling to make. Mr. Parker, while you have lost the right to custody, you have not lost the opportunity to be part of your son's life, if you are willing to do so on his terms." She turned back to Thomas. "I understand you have invited your father to your upcoming concert. I am making attendance at this event a condition of any future petition for visitation rights. Mr. Parker needs to see who his son really is, not who he wished him to be." As the judge's gavel fell, finalizing the ruling, Thomas felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He turned his wheelchair to face his father, gathering courage for what he needed to say. "Dad," he called softly, causing Richard Parker to freeze in the act of gathering his papers. "I meant what I said about wanting you to come to the concert, not because I need you to be proud of me anymore, but because I'm proud of who I am. And maybe that's something you need to see." For a moment, father and son looked at each other across the divide of the courtroom. Something flickered in Richard's eyes, recognition, perhaps, or the first crack in the wall he'd built around his heart. Without speaking, he gave a single sharp nod before turning to leave. Outside the courthouse, the spring air felt fresher somehow, filled with possibility. News crews had gathered, alerted by the morning's newspaper article about Thomas's upcoming concert. But Miss Thompson and the bailiffs kept them at a respectful distance as the family made their way to their cars. "How do you feel?" Sarah asked softly as she helped Thomas into their van. Thomas thought about the question as he watched his father's Mercedes pull away from the courthouse. Like I can finally play my song without wondering if I'm allowed to be heard." Grace leaned forward from the back seat. "Speaking of the song, we should head to the studio. Diana called earlier. They want to do a final sound check with the recording of Elizabeth's voice." "Actually," Thomas said, surprising himself with the clarity of his decision, "I want to go to school first. Just for music class. I want to play through the whole piece once with Mr. Rodriguez where it all started." Jim and Sarah exchanged understanding smiles in the rearview mirror. They knew, as Thomas did, that Pine Grove Elementary's music room would always be sacred space, the place where a boy who had been silenced first discovered he had a song to sing. As they drove away from the courthouse, Thomas caught a glimpse of Jenny Chen, the Tribune reporter, scribbling in her notebook. He wondered what she would write about today's events. Would she understand that this wasn't a story about winning or losing, but about finding your own voice and having the courage to use it? The guitar case in the seat beside him seemed to hum with potential energy, like it knew it would soon be part of something bigger than itself. In just a week, Thomas would take the stage at Central City Concert Hall, bringing together his mother's melody and his own harmony in a way that would show the world and his father that different didn't mean less, it just meant finding your own way to shine. The week before the concert passed in a blur of rehearsals and anticipation. The Central City Concert Hall had become Thomas's second home, its pristine acoustics perfectly capturing every note of his mother's song. On the final rehearsal day, Ms. Foster had arranged for him to practice on the main stage, giving him a taste of what the actual performance would feel like. "The house lights will be dimmed," she explained, gesturing to the vast auditorium before them. "But you'll be able to see the first few rows. We've reserved them for your family and special guests." Thomas positioned himself at center stage, Papa Joe's guitar gleaming under the professional lighting. The technicians had created a beautiful setup. His wheelchair would be bathed in a soft spotlight, with a larger screen behind him where his mother's video would play during their duet. "Can we try it once with the video?" he asked, his voice echoing slightly in the empty hall. Dave, who had become much more than just their sound engineer, gave a thumbs up from the control booth, as the familiar opening notes of his mother's recording filled the space. Thomas closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him. Elizabeth's voice, crystal clear through the state-of-the-art sound system, seemed to fill every corner of the auditorium. When he joined in with Papa Joe's guitar, the harmony they created was everything he'd hoped for. A conversation across time between mother and son. Sarah, watching from the front row with tears in her eyes, turned to Grace. "It's like they're actually singing together," she whispered. "Like Elizabeth is right here with him." Grace nodded, unable to speak past the emotion in her throat. Robert held her hand tightly, his own eyes glistening as he watched his grandson transform on stage. The scared, silent boy they'd first met was gone, replaced by a confident young artist who had found his voice. Mr. Rodriguez, who had been invited to the rehearsal as Thomas's first music teacher, made notes on his tablet. "The transition between the third and fourth verses needs a slight adjustment," he suggested. "Let's try bringing your part in a bit softer there, Thomas. Let your mother's voice lead the way." They worked on the fine details for hours, perfecting every nuance. Thomas's fingers were getting tired, but he pushed through, determined to honor both his mother's original composition and his own addition to it. The song had evolved into something beyond what either of them had created separately. It was now a testimony to the power of love to bridge any distance, even time itself. During a break, Carlos and Maria appeared with sandwiches from Thomas's favorite deli. "Mom said you needed brain food," Carlos announced, setting up an impromptu picnic in the green room. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" Maria asked, carefully arranging Thomas's food where he could easily reach it. Thomas considered the question as he took a bite. Not nervous exactly. More like ready. Like everything that happened before was leading to this moment. Jim, who had arrived with the children, sat down across from him. "You know, I've been teaching for 20 years, and I've never seen a student transform the way you have. It's not just the music. It's like you finally found your place in the world." "I have," Thomas said simply, "and it's not just one place. It's with you and Sarah, with Grace and Robert, at school with Mr. Rodriguez, and even here on stage. All these different parts of my life that fit together now, like harmony," Mr. Rodriguez finished, joining them with his own lunch. "Different notes that create something beautiful together." As they ate, Ms. Foster stopped by with the final program for tomorrow's concert. Thomas's performance would close the show, the featured piece of the evening. The program included a beautiful write-up about the song's history, mentioning both Elizabeth's original composition and Thomas's contribution to it. "We've also included a special note about Papa Joe's guitar," Ms. Foster said, showing Thomas the relevant page. "How it found its way to you just when you needed it most." These kinds of details help the audience connect with the music on a deeper level. After lunch, they ran through the entire piece one last time. The technical team recorded it as a backup. though everyone agreed that the live performance would have an energy that couldn't be captured in rehearsal. As they were packing up for the day, Dave called Thomas over to the sound booth. "I want to show you something," he said, pulling up a complex audio wave on his computer. "See these patterns? This is where your mother's voice and your guitar line up perfectly. It's like you're completing each other's musical sentences." Thomas stared at the visual representation of their duet, fascinated by the way the wavelengths danced together on the screen. "Do you think—" He hesitated, then pressed on. "Do you think she would have liked it? What I added to her song?" Dave's expression softened. "Kid, I've been doing this job for 30 years. I've seen all kinds of musicians try to cover or adapt other people's work. But what you've done here, this isn't just an adaptation, it's a conversation. You're not changing her song, you're answering it. And from everything I've learned about your mother while working on this project, I think that's exactly what she would have wanted." On the drive home, Thomas was quieter than usual, lost in thought as he watched the city lights blur past the van's window. Sarah caught his eye in the rearview mirror. "Penny, for your thoughts?" "I was just thinking about tomorrow," he said slowly. "About everyone who'll be there. You and Jim, Grace and Robert, all my friends from school, and my father." "Are you worried about him coming?" Thomas shook his head. "No, not anymore. I hope he's ready to really listen, not just to the music, but to what it means, to who I am now." As they pulled into the driveway of the house that had become his true home, Thomas looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the evening sky. Somewhere up there, he liked to think, his mother was watching, proud of the son who had found his own way to sing. The morning of the concert dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through Thomas's window and catching the polished surface of Papa Joe's guitar, which stood ready in its stand. He'd barely slept, his mind filled with music and anticipation, but he felt surprisingly alert as Sarah helped him prepare for the day. "Your new suit came back from the alterations," she said, hanging the garment bag carefully on his closet door. They'd chosen it together, a deep blue that reminded Thomas of the night sky, with subtle musical notes embedded in the fabric's pattern. "Did you remember to put the lucky pick in the pocket?" he asked, referring to the guitar pick Grace had given him, one that had belonged to Elizabeth during her college performances. Sarah smiled, patting the jacket's breast pocket. "Right here, close to your heart, just like your mum would want." The morning was dedicated to regular activities. Miss Foster had insisted Thomas maintain his normal routine until afternoon. Rehearsal, saying it would help calm his nerves. But even simple tasks felt different today. During breakfast, his toast tasted like anticipation. In his morning classes, every tick of the clock seemed to carry the rhythm of his mother's song. His friends at school treated the day as a celebration. Miguel had organized a good luck card signed by everyone in class, its pages filled with drawings of guitars and musical notes. Even the school secretary, usually stern and proper, gave him a warm hug when Sarah came to pick him up early. We'll be watching the live stream tonight," Mr. Rodriguez said as Thomas prepared to leave. "The whole school is behind you, Thomas." The atmosphere at the concert hall was electric when they arrived. Other young performers were warming up in practice rooms, their music floating through the corridors and mixing into a symphony of preparation. In his assigned dressing room, Thomas found a surprise. The walls had been decorated with photos from his journey, from his first day at Pine Grove to his recent rehearsals. "A little visual inspiration," Ms. Foster explained, appearing in the doorway. "Sometimes it helps to remember how far you've come." As the makeup artist worked to prepare him for the stage lights, Thomas studied the photos. There he was with the Martinez family at his first school concert, his hands still unsure on the guitar strings. Another showed him with Grace and Robert, poring over his mother's old songbooks. A recent one captured him in rehearsal, his face intense with concentration as he played. 5 minutes until sound check," Dave called, poking his head in. "How are you feeling, maestro?" Before Thomas could answer, there was a commotion in the hallway. To everyone's surprise, his entire class from Pine Grove had arrived early, led by Carlos and Maria. They carried handmade signs and wore T-shirts with Thomas's fan club printed in glitter. "We couldn't wait until the performance," Carlos explained, grinning. "We wanted to wish you luck first." The support of his friends helped calm Thomas's growing nerves. As he wheeled out for his final sound check, their encouraging words followed him like a protective shield. The main auditorium was already beginning to buzz with early arrivals, mostly tech crew and ushers preparing for the evening. Thomas took his position on stage, allowing Dave to make final adjustments to the microphones and sound levels. "We've got a perfect blend between your live performance and your mom's recording," Dave assured him. "It's going to be magical." During a break in the technical preparations, Sarah appeared with a small package wrapped in silver paper. "This came for you," she said softly. "From your father." Thomas's hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside was a framed photograph he'd never seen before. Elizabeth, young and radiant, sitting at a piano with a gentle smile on her face. A note accompanied it. "Thomas, I found this while cleaning out my office. It was taken the day your mother told me she was pregnant with you. She was working on a special piece of music, though she wouldn't let me hear it. Now I understand why. I'll be in the audience tonight. Dad." The simple acknowledgement of Elizabeth's song, of the connection between mother and son that Richard had denied for so long, brought unexpected tears to Thomas's eyes. Sarah squeezed his shoulder gently, understanding without words. As the afternoon progressed, more people began arriving, the other young performers with their families, members of the press, and distinguished guests. Grace and Robert appeared, with a bouquet of blue roses, Elizabeth's favorite flowers. Jim arrived shortly after, carrying Papa Joe's guitar case with reverent care after its final tuning. In his dressing room, Thomas changed into his performance suit, carefully transferring the lucky pick to his pocket. The photographer from the Tribune was allowed a few quick photos, capturing the quiet moment of preparation. "Almost time, Ms. Foster announced, her usual professional demeanor softened by genuine excitement. "Thomas, would you like a moment alone before we begin?" When everyone had filed out, Thomas wheeled to the full-length mirror. The person who looked back at him wasn't the scared boy from the Parker mansion, or even the uncertain child who had first touched Papa Joe's guitar. This was someone new, someone who had found his voice through music and love. He touched the lucky pick in his pocket, then the frame of his mother's photo, creating a connection between past and present. In less than an hour, he would take the stage to share their song with the world. But first, he closed his eyes and whispered the words Sarah had taught him to say before every performance. "This is who I am, this is my song, and tonight I'm ready to let it soar." The Central City Concert Hall had never felt more alive. Every seat was filled, the gentle murmur of anticipation rising to the ornate ceiling like a prayer. In the wings, Thomas watched the other young performers complete their pieces, each one showcasing their unique talents and perspectives. A girl with prosthetic arms played the violin with breathtaking precision, while a boy who couldn't speak sang through sign language and movement, his interpreter's voice carrying his lyrics to the spellbound audience. 5 minutes, Ms. Foster whispered, appearing at Thomas's side. She adjusted his collar slightly, more out of nervous energy than necessity. "Your families are all in place, and your father just arrived. He's in the seat we reserved, 3rd row center." Thomas's heart skipped a beat, but he managed to keep his hands steady on Papa Joe's guitar. Through the curtain, he could make out the shapes of his loved ones, the Martinez family, his grandparents, his school friends, and now his father. Different chapters of his life all gathered to witness this moment. Mr. Rodriguez appeared for a final word of encouragement. "Remember what we talked about," he said softly. "This isn't about being perfect, it's about being true." The stage. Manager signaled that it was time. As Thomas wheeled into position, the audience fell silent. The spotlight found him warm and gentle, while the large screen behind him remained dark, waiting for its moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice filled the hall. "Our final performer tonight is a young man whose journey reminds us that music transcends all boundaries. Playing an original composition titled Conversations with My Mother, Thomas Parker." The silence in the auditorium was absolute, as Thomas positioned his fingers on the guitar strings. He looked out at the audience, finding Sarah's encouraging smile, Grace's tearful pride, and there in the third row, his father's tense, unreadable expression. Taking a deep breath, Thomas began to play. The first notes of his mother's melody filled the space, clear and pure. Right on cue, the screen behind him illuminated, showing Elizabeth at her piano. As her recorded voice joined his guitar, gasps of recognition rippled through the audience. "My love for you is like the stars above, always there, even when hidden from view." Thomas's guitar wove around his mother's voice, supporting and enriching her melody. When they reached the bridge, the part he had composed to connect her verse to his, the music shifted subtly. Elizabeth's recording faded slightly, allowing Thomas's adaptation to emerge. And then, surprising everyone who hadn't been at the rehearsals, Thomas began to sing. His voice, clear and strong, carried his response to his mother's lyrics. "Your love found me through the darkest night, showed me how to spread my wings and fly. Though we never met, your song lives in me, teaching me to be who I'm meant to be." In the audience, Sarah clutched Jim's hand as tears streamed down her face. Grace and Robert held each other, watching their grandson bridge the gap between past and present through music. Carlos and Maria, sitting with their school friends, beamed with pride. But it was Richard Parker's reaction that caught Sarah's attention. The usually stoic businessman was leaning forward in his seat, his hands gripping the armrests, his eyes fixed on the stage with an expression of dawning recognition. For perhaps the first time, he was seeing his son, really seeing him, not as a disappointment or an obligation, but as a person in his own right. On stage, Thomas had reached the final movement of the piece. His mother's recording returned, their voices and music intertwining in perfect harmony. The song spoke of love that transcended physical limitations, of hope that outlasted sorrow, of the unbreakable bond between a mother who had loved unconditionally and a son who had found his way back to that love through music. As the final notes faded, there was a moment of complete silence. Thomas sat in his wheelchair, guitar across his lap, his mother's image still glowing on the screen behind him. Then, like a wave breaking, the audience erupted in thunderous applause. People rose to their feet, many wiping tears from their eyes. Carlos and Maria started chanting, "Thomas, Thomas," and soon the entire audience joined in. But Thomas wasn't looking at the standing ovation. His eyes were fixed on his father, who had risen with everyone else. Richard Parker's face was streaked with tears, his usual mask of control completely gone. Miss Foster appeared at Thomas's side, gesturing for him to take another bow. As he did, the screen behind him shifted to show a montage, Elizabeth playing her original song, Thomas learning guitar with Sarah, rehearsal footage, all building to this moment. The audience's applause grew even louder. Flowers began appearing on stage, roses, lilies, and there in the center, a bouquet of blue roses identical to the ones in the photograph his father had sent. Thomas looked out at the sea of faces, all celebrating not just his music, but his journey from silence to song. In that moment, under the warm spotlight with his mother's voice still echoing in his heart, Thomas realized something profound. He had done more than just perform a piece of music. He had shown the world that different wasn't less, that challenges could become opportunities, and that love, in all its forms, was the most powerful music of all. The green room buzzed with excitement after the performance. Well-wishers crowded around Thomas, offering congratulations and sharing how deeply his music had touched them. The girl with prosthetic arms who had played violin earlier gave him a warm hug, whispering, "You showed them. You showed them all." Sarah managed the flow of visitors with gentle efficiency, making sure Thomas wasn't overwhelmed. Grace and Robert stood nearby, greeting people who had known Elizabeth and sharing stories of their daughter's musical legacy. Jim supervised the group of enthusiastic classmates who had come backstage, while Carlos and Maria appointed themselves unofficial guardians of Papa Joe's guitar. "Thomas," Miss Foster appeared in the doorway. "There's someone else who would like to speak with you. Only if you're ready." The room grew quiet as Richard Parker entered. He looked different somehow, less imposing, more human, The designer suit couldn't hide the fact that his hands were shaking slightly. "Could we have a moment?" he asked, his voice rougher than usual. Just my son and me?" Sarah looked at Thomas questioningly. At his nod, she began ushering people out, though she remained within earshot, protective as always. Father and son regarded each other in silence for a long moment. Thomas still sat in his wheelchair, Papa Joe's guitar across his lap like a shield. Richard Parker stood awkwardly, all his usual corporate confidence stripped away. "I didn't know," Richard finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, "about Elizabeth's song, about how much music meant to her, to you." "There's a lot you didn't know," Thomas replied quietly, "because you never tried to learn." Richard flinched at the truth in those words. "No, I didn't. I was so focused on what I thought you should be that I never saw who you actually are." He gestured to the guitar. You play beautifully. Your mother would have loved it." "I know she would have," Thomas said, "because she loved me before she even knew me. Her song taught me that." Richard sank into a nearby chair, seeming to age years in moments. "I failed her, and I failed you. When we lost her, I couldn't face the fact that our son would face challenges. She would have known how to handle it. She would have seen the gift in you that everyone saw tonight." "The Martinez family saw it," Thomas said. "They didn't try to fix me or change. They just helped me find my own way." "Yes, they did." Richard straightened slightly. "The judge was right to grant them custody. They've given you what I couldn't: acceptance, understanding, love." Thomas studied his father's face, seeing, past the familiar features, to the pain and regret beneath. "You could still be part of my life," he said slowly. "Not as someone who wants to change me, but as someone who wants to know me. The real me." "I'd like that," Richard whispered. "If you'll give me the chance, I'd like to learn about music, about what makes you happy. I can't undo what I did, but maybe I can learn to be better." Before Thomas could respond, there was a gentle knock at the door. Dave, the sound engineer, poked his head in. "Sorry to interrupt, but we've got something for Thomas." Entered carrying a professional recording setup. "We captured tonight's performance perfectly. Would you like to hear a playback?" Thomas looked at his father. "Would you like to stay, really listen this time?" Richard nodded, wiping moisture from his eyes. As Dave set up the equipment, Sarah and the others quietly returned, arranging themselves around the room. When the music began playing, Thomas watched his father close his eyes, really hearing Elizabeth's voice, really listening to the conversation between mother and son that the song represented. As the recording played, Thomas felt Sarah's hand on his shoulder, saw Grace and Robert holding each other, noticed Carlos and Maria swaying slightly to the melody. His father sat completely still, tears flowing freely now, perhaps truly hearing Elizabeth's love for the first time since losing her. The playback ended, but the music seemed to linger in the air, changing something in the space between father and son. It wasn't forgiveness. That would take time and proof of genuine change. It wasn't forgetting. The past had shaped who Thomas had become, but it was perhaps the beginning of understanding. "Your mother always said music could heal anything," Grace said softly, breaking the silence. Maybe she was right. Thomas looked around the room at his complicated, beautiful family. The Martinezes who had chosen him, his grandparents who had found him, and his father who was finally trying to see him. Different notes coming together to create something whole. "The healing already happened," he said, running his fingers over Papa Joe's guitar strings. "Tonight wasn't about healing, it was about showing who I've become. And I'm not finished becoming yet." As if to emphasize his point, Ms. Foster appeared with news that several music schools had expressed interest in Thomas's talent, and a children's hospital had asked if he would consider playing for their patients. The future was opening up, full of possibilities that had nothing to do with the limitations others had tried to place on him. In that moment, Thomas felt his mother's presence stronger than ever, not in sadness or loss, but in the joy of creation, in the power of music, to speak truths that words alone couldn't express. He had taken her melody and made it his own, just as he had taken his challenges and transformed them into strengths. The days following the concert brought a whirlwind of changes and opportunities. Thomas's performance had struck a chord that resonated far beyond the walls of the Central City Concert Hall. The Tribune's front-page story, featuring a powerful photo of Thomas and his mother's image on the screen behind him, sparked a wave of interest in his story. "Look at this one," Carlos exclaimed during breakfast, scrolling through his tablet. "Children's Music Therapy Foundation wants you to be their youth ambassador. They think your story could inspire other kids to find their voice through music." Sarah placed a plate of pancakes in front of Thomas, her eyes scanning the growing pile of invitations and offers on the kitchen table. "The Central City Children's Hospital called again. They're very interested in your idea about starting a music program for their long-term patients." Thomas absorbed all this while absently strumming Papa Joe's guitar, which rarely left his side these days. The instrument seemed to hum with new energy, as if it too sensed the expanding horizons before them. "What do you think about all this?" Jim asked, noting Thomas's thoughtful expression. "It's okay to take time to process everything." "I want to help," Thomas said slowly, his fingers finding the opening notes of his mother's song. "But I want to do it right, not just as a symbol or a story, but in a way that really makes a difference." Grace and Robert, who had extended their stay to help manage the post-concert activities, exchanged proud glances. "That sounds exactly like something Elizabeth would say," Grace observed. "She always believed music should serve a purpose beyond entertainment." A knock at the door interrupted their discussion. To everyone's surprise, it was Richard Parker, looking somewhat uncomfortable in casual clothes rather than his usual business suit. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, hovering in the doorway until Sarah invited him in. Thomas watched his father take in the scene, the comfortable chaos of a family breakfast, the papers scattered across the table, the way everyone naturally adjusted to include his wheelchair in their circle. It was everything the Parker mansion had never been. "I've been thinking," Richard said, accepting the coffee Sarah offered, "about all these opportunities coming your way. I know I don't have any right to make suggestions, but I do have experience with organizing charitable foundations." Thomas tensed slightly, but his father quickly added, "Not to control anything, just, if you want, I could help set up the legal and financial frameworks, so you can focus on the music and helping others. It would be your vision, your decisions. I'd just handle the business side." The offer hung in the air. Thomas looked at Sarah and Jim, who gave encouraging nods, then at his grandparents, who seemed cautiously optimistic. "You'd really just help, not try to take over?" Richard's face softened with understanding. "Thomas, I spent years trying to make you fit into my world. I think it's time I tried to fit into yours." The conversation that followed was unlike any they'd had before. Richard listened as Thomas shared his ideas about adaptive music programs, about reaching children who felt isolated or different, about using technology to make music accessible to everyone. For the first time, father and son found common ground, not in the world of corporate success that Richard had tried to force, but in the possibility of using their different strengths to help others. Mr. Rodriguez arrived later that morning for Thomas's regular lesson, bringing news from school. "The music department's been flooded with calls," he reported excitedly. "Other schools want to know about our adaptive music program. They want to learn how to make their own programs more inclusive." As they discussed possibilities, Thomas remembered something his mother had written in one of her journals. "Music isn't just about playing notes, it's about creating connections." Now he understood what she meant. His performance hadn't just been about sharing his story, it had opened doors for others to find their own musical voices. "I think," he said, interrupting the adults' discussion of logistics, "I want to start with the Children's Hospital. Not with a big program right away, but with individual sessions. Getting to know the kids, understanding what they need, letting them show me how music can help them, just like Mr. Rodriguez did with me." Sarah beamed with pride. "That sounds perfect, honey. Starting small but meaningful." "The foundation. And support that approach," Richard offered tentatively. "We could set up a pilot program, document the results, then use that to expand to other hospitals." Grace pulled out Elizabeth's old notebook. I found something yesterday that might help. Your mother used to volunteer at a children's ward during college. She kept notes about the songs that worked best for different situations. Lullabies for anxiety, upbeat tunes for physical therapy sessions. As they planned, Thomas felt a growing sense of purpose. The music he'd found through pain and rejection was becoming a bridge to help others. Papa Joe's guitar, once a symbol of new beginnings, was now an instrument of transformation, not just for him, but for everyone his music could reach. "There's something else," Richard said, as the discussion wound down. "The Parker Foundation, I'd like to rename it. Call it the Elizabeth Parker Foundation for Music and Healing, if that's okay with everyone." The suggestion brought tears to Grace's eyes. Robert squeezed her hand as she nodded wordlessly. Thomas felt something shift in his heart. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition of his father's attempt to make amends in a meaningful way. As the morning turned to afternoon, Thomas wheeled himself to the backyard garden he and Sarah had planted. The seeds they'd sown weeks ago were now sprouting, reaching toward the sun. Like those plants, he thought, his music had started as something small and personal, but was growing into something bigger than himself. The pediatric wing of Central City Children's Hospital was brighter than Thomas had expected. Colorful murals adorned the walls, and the nurses' stations were decorated with children's artwork. Still, he felt nervous as he wheeled through the corridors, Papa Joe's guitar secure in its case across his lap. "Ready for this?" Sarah asked softly. She and Jim had taken the morning off to support him during his first official music session. Dr. Laura Chen, the hospital's chief of pediatric care, and coincidentally Dr. Marina Chen's sister, walked beside them. "We have a young patient who I think would particularly benefit from music therapy," Dr. Chen explained. "Jamie is 12 and has been here for 3 months. She's responding well to treatment, but the isolation has been difficult. When she saw your concert livestream, it was the first time she showed real enthusiasm in weeks." They stopped outside, a room decorated with space-themed stickers. Through the window, Thomas could see a girl sitting up in bed, her attention focused on a tablet. Like him, she was surrounded by medical equipment, but he noticed she had managed to decorate her IV pole with fairy lights. "Jamie?" Dr. Chen knocked gently. "There's someone here to meet you." The girl looked up, her eyes widening as she recognized Thomas. "You're the one from the concert, the one who played with his mom's recording." Thomas wheeled into the room, smiling. "That's me. I heard you're interested in music too." Jamie nodded enthusiastically. "I used to play piano before." She gestured vaguely at the medical equipment around her. "I miss it a lot." "Well," Thomas said, opening his guitar case, "maybe we can make some music together. Different doesn't mean impossible. It just means finding a new way." For the next hour, Thomas shared modified techniques he'd learned, showing Jamie how to create music despite physical limitations. They started simple, with rhythm exercises using small hand movements, then progressed to basic chords on a small electronic keyboard Dr. Chen provided. "You know what this reminds me of," Thomas said as they worked. "My mother's journal entries about her hospital volunteering. She wrote that sometimes the best music comes from working with what you have, not wishing for what you don't." Jamie's face lit up. "My mom says something similar. She says it's not about being perfect, it's about being present." She paused, then added shyly, Could you play your song? The one from the concert?" Thomas positioned Papa Joe's guitar. As he played, other young patients began appearing in the doorway, drawn by the music. Parents and staff gathered too, watching as the simple hospital room transformed into an impromptu concert hall. When he finished, a small boy in a wheelchair spoke up from the doorway. "Could you teach us too? My hands don't work so good anymore, but I really want to make music." "That's exactly why I'm here," Thomas replied, noting how the boy's face brightened. "We'll find your way to make music. Everyone has their own song. Sometimes we just need help discovering it." The session extended well beyond its scheduled time, with Thomas working individually with several children, adapting techniques to their specific needs and abilities. Dr. Chen observed with growing enthusiasm, taking notes on the children's engagement and emotional responses. "This is more than I hoped for," she told Sarah and Jim. "Look at how they're responding to him. It's not just about the music, it's about seeing someone like them achieving something beautiful." As they prepared to leave, promising to return, next week Jamie called out, "Wait, I wrote something. Would you read it?" She handed Thomas a slightly crumpled paper. It was a poem titled "Different Music." "Could I set it to music?" Thomas asked after reading it. "Maybe we could work on it together next time, make it our first collaboration." Jamie's entire face lit up. "Really? Like you did with your mum's song?" "Exactly like that," Thomas smiled. "Different voices coming together to create something new." In the car ride home, Thomas was unusually quiet, processing the morning's experiences. "You okay, honey?" Sarah asked, catching his eye in the rearview mirror. "I just keep thinking about what Jamie said about being present, not perfect," he replied. "That's what everyone tried to tell me. You and Jim, Grace and Robert, Mr. Rodriguez. But today, helping those kids, I finally really understood it." Jim reached back to squeeze his shoulder. "You did more than understand it. You showed them how to live it." "And this is just the beginning," Sarah added. "The foundation paperwork should be completed next week. Think of how many more children you'll be able to reach." Thomas hugged Papa Joe's guitar case closer. "It's like the instrument knew where it needed to go, from Papa Joe to me, and now from me to others who need to find their voice." As they pulled into their driveway, Thomas noticed new flowers blooming in the garden. Blue roses like the ones his mother had loved, planted by Grace before she and Robert returned home. Life was like that garden now, he realized. New growth emerging from what had been planted before, creating beauty in unexpected ways. That evening, as he worked on setting Jamie's poem to music, Thomas felt more certain than ever about his path forward. His mother's song had shown him the way, but now he was creating his own melody, one that could help others find their voice, just as he had found his. 6 months after the concert, the Elizabeth Parker Foundation for Music and Healing had grown beyond anyone's expectations. The pilot program at Central City Children's Hospital had expanded to 3 other hospitals, and requests were coming in from across the country. Thomas, now 11, found himself at the center of a movement he'd never imagined possible. "Look at this," Jamie said excitedly during their weekly session, holding up her tablet. She'd become not just a student, but a collaborator, helping Thomas develop new ways to teach music to children with different abilities. Their original composition, based on her poem, had become the Foundation's unofficial anthem. 3 more. "Hospitals want to start programs," she read from the screen, "and that music school in Seattle wants to adapt their teaching methods based on what we're doing here." Thomas positioned Papa Joe's guitar, preparing for their group session. The hospital's recreation room had been transformed into a music studio, complete with adaptive instruments, developed through a partnership between Richard Parker's tech division and music therapy experts. "Remember how scared we were during our first performance?" Jamie grinned, adjusting her own adapted keyboard. They'd given a small concert for the pediatric ward last month, featuring patients who'd been part of the music program. "Terrified," Thomas agreed, "but look at us now." The room began filling with their regular participants. Michael, the boy, in the wheelchair who'd been one of their first students, now played a specially designed electronic drum set that responded to even the slightest touch. Sarah, a girl with limited mobility in her arms, had mastered a breath-controlled synthesizer that allowed her to create complex melodies. "Before we start," Thomas announced, "I have some exciting news. The Foundation's board, that includes my dad, my grandparents, and the Martinezes, has approved our suggestion. We're going to start a scholarship program for adaptive music. Education." The room erupted in cheers. This had been a dream born from their sessions, as they discovered how many talented young musicians were held back by lack of access to adaptive instruments and specialized training. "And," he continued, "Jamie has been chosen as our first student ambassador. She'll help us design programs that really work for kids like us." Jamie's face lit up with joy. She'd recently received good news about her health and was preparing to return home, but had worried about leaving the music program behind. This new role meant she could stay involved while helping expand their reach. As they began their session, Thomas couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd all come. The children who had once been isolated by their conditions were now part of a vibrant musical community. They composed together, performed together, and, most importantly, supported each other's journeys. Richard Parker, who had quietly entered to observe, watched from the doorway. He'd kept his promise to handle the business side without interfering with the creative aspects. More than that, he'd become a genuine advocate for adaptive music education, using his corporate connections to secure funding and support. "It's amazing," he said softly to Sarah, who stood beside him. "I spent years trying to force Thomas into my world, never realizing he was creating something far more valuable than anything I could have imagined." Sarah smiled, watching as Thomas guided a new student through her first notes on an adapted violin. He's found his purpose, and in helping others find their voice, he's grown so much stronger in his own. The session continued with their newest piece, a collaborative composition that incorporated each student's unique musical voice. Michael's gentle drum beats provided the foundation, while Sarah's synthesizer added ethereal melodies. Jamie's keyboard and Thomas's guitar wove everything together, creating a symphony of different abilities working in perfect harmony. As they played, Thomas caught sight of a familiar photo on the wall. His mother at her piano, the same image his father had given him before the concert. Below it hung the article from the Tribune, now framed alongside pictures of their growing music community. The foundation had recently discovered more of Elizabeth's writings about music therapy, and her insights were being incorporated into their teaching methods. It was as if she was still guiding them, her vision of inclusive music education finally becoming reality through her son. "You know what's really cool?" Jamie said during a break, as the younger kids enjoyed some snacks provided by the hospital staff. "We're not just making music, we're changing how people see us. My doctor said other hospitals are starting to include music therapy in their regular treatment plans because of what we're doing here." Thomas nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Each note they played challenged preconceptions about disability. Each performance showed the world that different wasn't less. It was just a different way of creating beauty. "My mum wrote in her journal that music has the power to build bridges," he said, strumming softly on Papa Joe's guitar. "I used to think she meant between her and me, but now I see it's so much bigger than that. We're building bridges for everyone who needs a way to express themselves." As the afternoon session wound down, Thomas looked around the room at his growing musical family. These weren't just students or patients anymore. They were fellow artists, each finding their own way to add their voice to the world's symphony. The one-year anniversary of Thomas's concert at Central City Concert Hall arrived with the first hints of spring. The Elizabeth Parker Foundation had organized a special celebration, not in the grand concert hall this time, but in the hospital's newly renovated auditorium, a space designed specifically for adaptive performances. The room was filled with families, medical staff, and supporters of the foundation. But the real stars were the young musicians themselves, each one representing a different chapter in the foundation's growing story. They had spent weeks preparing for this performance, determined to show the world how far they'd come. "Ready for this?" Thomas asked Jamie, who was adjusting her keyboard one last time. She would be performing their collaborative piece before heading off to music school next month, having been accepted with a full scholarship from the foundation. "Born ready," she grinned, though her hands trembled slightly with excitement. "Still can't believe we're actually doing this." The program began with Michael's Drum Symphony, a piece he had composed to express his journey through treatment. The adapted drums responded to his lightest touch, creating complex rhythms that filled the auditorium with energy. Sarah followed with her breath-controlled synthesizer, performing a haunting melody that brought tears to many eyes. Throughout the performances, Thomas caught glimpses of his extended family in the audience. The Martinezes beamed with pride from the front row, while Grace and Robert filmed everything for their growing archive of the foundation's achievements. His father sat with the board members, but his attention was fully focused on the music, his usual business demeanor softened by genuine emotion. When it was time for the finale, Thomas took center stage alongside Jamie. Papa Joe's guitar, now bearing the loving marks of countless therapy sessions and performances, rested comfortably in his lap. The screen behind them displayed images from their journey, therapy sessions, small performances, moments of breakthrough and joy. This piece, Thomas announced to the audience, is called Different Voices, One Song. It's dedicated to everyone who helped us find our way to this moment. Our families, our teachers, our doctors and therapists, but most of all it's dedicated to those who are still searching for their voice. We want you to know that there's a place for you in this symphony. The music began softly, with Jamie's keyboard introducing the theme they'd developed from her original poem. Thomas's guitar joined in, adding layers of harmony that spoke of challenge and triumph. One by one, other young musicians from the program added their parts. Michael's drums, Sarah's synthesizer, and a dozen other adapted instruments, each contributing its unique voice to the whole. As they played, Thomas felt the presence of all those who had brought him to this moment. He felt Sarah's unwavering support in every note, heard Mr. Rodriguez's encouraging words in every chord progression. He sensed his mother's love flowing through the melody and Papa Joe's spirit in the guitar's warm tones. The piece built to a crescendo, each different voice rising and falling in perfect harmony, demonstrating that music knew no boundaries of ability or circumstance. When the final notes faded away, the audience erupted in thunderous applause, many rising to their feet in celebration. Dr. Chen, who had supported the program from its inception, took the stage to make an announcement. Thanks to the success of this program, Central City Children's Hospital is establishing a permanent center for music therapy and adaptive arts. And I'm thrilled to announce that Thomas Parker will serve as our youth program director, helping thus develop new ways to bring music into the healing process. The news drew fresh applause, but Thomas was focused on the faces of his students, past and present, each one representing a story of discovery and triumph. Jamie was crying happy tears, her keyboard still under her fingers, like an old friend. Michael beamed from behind his drums, while Sarah's smile could have lit up the entire auditorium. After the ceremony, as families mingled and celebrated, Richard Parker approached his son. "Your mother," he said softly, "would be so proud of what you've created here. Not just the music, but the way you've helped others find their strength through it." Thomas looked around at what they had built together, not just a program or a foundation, but a community where difference was celebrated and every voice mattered. "We all did this," he replied. "Everyone who believed in the power of music to heal and connect." Sarah joined them carrying a surprise, a beautifully bound book containing letters from children and families whose lives had been touched by the program. "Your story inspired all of this," she said, handing Thomas the book. "But now it's become so much bigger than one story. It's become a symphony of hope." As the celebration continued around them, Thomas opened the book, reading messages of gratitude and inspiration. Each letter represented a life changed, a voice discovered, a bridge built through music. Papa Joe's guitar rested in his lap, its well-worn surface reflecting the lights of the auditorium, an instrument that had helped him find his voice, now helping others find theirs. The foundation's work was really just beginning, but looking at the joy in the room, Thomas knew they were on the right path. His mother's song had shown him the way, and now he was helping others write their own melodies, proving that every voice, no matter how different, had the power to create something beautiful. 18 months after that first life-changing concert, Thomas found himself back on the desert road where his journey had begun. The location, once a symbol of abandonment, was now transformed. A modern building stood proudly against the desert backdrop, the Elizabeth Parker Center for Adaptive Music and Arts, the Foundation's first dedicated facility. "It's perfect," Sarah said softly, watching Thomas take in the completed building. The center had been his idea, a place where children with different abilities could come for intensive music programs, regardless of their financial situation. The location, challenging as it was emotionally, had been his choice too. "This way," he had explained to the foundation board, "every child who feels lost or different will know there's a place where they belong. Right here, where I thought everything was ending, new beginnings can start." The grand opening was scheduled for tomorrow, but today was special for another reason. Thomas had organized a private concert for a very specific audience, children, from local foster homes and group homes, each one facing their own challenges and feelings of displacement. "They're arriving," Carlos called from the entrance. Now 14, he had become one of the Foundation's most dedicated young volunteers, along with Maria, who ran their social media outreach. The buses pulled up, and children of various ages and abilities began filing into the center. Thomas wheeled to the entrance to greet them, Papa Joe's guitar across his lap. The instrument, though still his most treasured possession, now bore the loving marks of hundreds of therapy sessions and performances. "Welcome to your home for music," he announced, his voice strong and clear. "Here, there's no wrong way to make music, no wrong way to be yourself. We're all different, and that's what makes our symphony beautiful." The main performance space had been designed with input from Thomas and his students. Adaptive equipment was seamlessly integrated into the architecture, making it feel natural rather than medical. The walls featured art created by program participants, and a special display honored Elizabeth Parker's original vision of inclusive music education. As the children settled in, Thomas noticed their expressions, the same mix of uncertainty and hope he had seen in so many faces at the hospital. He began with the story they had come to hear, the one that had led to this moment. 2 years ago, I sat in this very spot, though it looked very different then. I thought I was alone, that being different meant being less. But I discovered something incredible. Our differences are what make our music unique." He started to play, beginning with his mother's melody. On the screen behind him, images appeared, not just of Elizabeth this time, but of all the children who had found their voice through the program. Jamie performing at her music school audition, Michael teaching drums to new students, Sarah composing for an adaptive orchestra. Grace and Robert, who had flown in for the opening, watched from the back of the room. "Elizabeth would be amazed," Grace whispered, squeezing her husband's hand. "Her song has touched so many lives." Richard Parker sat quietly among the audience, her changed man from the father who had once abandoned his son. He had become a fierce advocate for adaptive arts education, using his business expertise to ensure the Foundation's programs were accessible to all who needed them. As Thomas played, he invited the children to join in with simple percussion instruments that had been distributed earlier. The room filled with spontaneous music, some keeping perfect time, others creating their own rhythms, all becoming part of something larger than themselves. "Music finds a way," Thomas told them, echoing Mr. Rodriguez's words from so long ago. "It doesn't care if your hands work differently, if your body moves differently, if your mind processes differently. It only cares that you have something to say." He then introduced some of his original students, now peer mentors in the program. They demonstrated various adaptive instruments and techniques, showing the new children possibilities they might never have imagined. "When I first started playing," Sarah shared, demonstrating her breath-controlled synthesizer, "I thought my physical limitations would hold me back. Now I know they just led me to my own unique way of making music." Michael, from his adapted drum set, added, "The best part isn't just making music, it's finding people who understand you, who see your differences as strengths." Throughout the afternoon, Thomas moved among the children, helping them discover their own musical voices. Some gravitated toward traditional instruments with adaptive modifications, others found their rhythm through technology, and still others simply moved to the music in whatever way felt natural to them. The Martinez family watched it all with quiet pride. Jim, who still taught at Pine Grove, but now also consulted for the Foundation's educational programs, saw the same spark in these children's eyes that he had first noticed in Thomas, the realization that they weren't limited by their differences, but empowered by them. As the day drew to a close, Thomas gathered everyone for one final piece. The song that had begun as a duet between him and his mother had evolved into something greater, a celebration of different voices coming together in harmony. As the music filled the space, the desert sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors through the center's windows, as if nature itself was celebrating this moment of transformation. The morning of the center's official opening dawned bright and clear. Thomas sat in his room at the Martinez home, now filled with music books, adaptive instruments, and photographs documenting his journey. Papa Joe's guitar waited in its stand, ready for another day of changing lives through music. "Ready for the big day?" Sarah asked from the doorway. Though Thomas had grown and changed over the past 2 years, their morning routine remained a constant source of comfort and connection. "Almost," he replied, reaching for a leather-bound journal on his desk. It was a gift from Grace and Robert, Elizabeth's final notebook, which they had saved for when they felt he was ready. Inside, his mother's last entry spoke directly to his heart. "To my child, whoever you may be, never let anyone tell you what you can't do. Find your own way to sing, to dance, to live. Your voice matters, exactly as it is. Love, Mom." The Elizabeth. Parker Center for Adaptive Music and Arts stood as a testament to that message. As Thomas wheeled through its corridors for the official opening ceremony, he saw his mother's vision everywhere, in the inclusive design, in the array of adaptive instruments, in the faces of children discovering their own musical voices. The main hall was packed with supporters, media, and most importantly, families who would benefit from the center's programs. Jamie had flown in from music school to perform, along with many other students whose lives had been touched by the foundation. "Before we begin," Thomas addressed the gathering, "I want to share something with you. This center stands on the spot where I once felt most lost and alone. But that moment of abandonment led me to discover something incredible, that our greatest challenges can become our greatest gifts." He gestured to the families around him. "Every child who comes here will know they're not alone. They'll find not just music, but understanding, acceptance, and the freedom to be exactly who they are." The ceremony unfolded like a symphony itself. Students from the program performed pieces they had composed, each demonstration showing the endless possibilities of adaptive music. Michael's drum corps, featuring children with various physical challenges, brought the audience to their feet. Sarah's adaptive orchestra showed how technology and tradition could blend seamlessly. Richard Parker's speech surprised everyone with its emotional depth. 2 years ago, I couldn't see past my own limited vision of perfection. My son taught me that true perfection lies in authenticity, in being exactly who you are and helping others do the same. Grace and Robert shared stories of Elizabeth's early work in music therapy, connecting her dreams to the reality that had grown from them. The Martinez family spoke about the transformative power of unconditional love and acceptance. As the ceremony concluded, Thomas prepared for the final performance. But before he began, he had one more surprise. "When I first started this journey, I thought I was just finding my own voice. But what I discovered was something much more powerful, the ability to help others find theirs." At his signal, the back doors opened, and children from all of their programs across the country began filing in. Each carried an instrument adapted to their specific needs, their faces glowing with purpose and pride. "This," Thomas announced, "is the true sound of inclusion. The harmony of different voices, different abilities, different stories all coming together to create something beautiful." The performance that followed was unlike anything the audience had ever experienced. Hundreds of young musicians, each playing in their own unique way, joined together in a piece that Thomas had composed specifically for this moment. The music spoke of challenges overcome, of barriers broken, of love that transcended all differences. As the final notes faded, Thomas looked out at the gathering, his two families now unified in purpose, his father who had learned to see with new eyes, his students who had become teachers in their own right, and all the children who would find their voices in this place. Papa Joe's guitar, which had started him on this journey, gleamed under the lights. Like Thomas himself, it had been transformed by love and purpose, its music touching lives in ways that once seemed impossible. "This center," he concluded, "is more than a building. It's a promise to every child who feels different or alone, a promise that their voice matters, that their song deserves to be heard, that their differences make our world more beautiful." As the audience rose in a standing ovation, Thomas felt his mother's presence stronger than ever. Her song had been the beginning, but what had grown from it was beyond anything she could have imagined, a symphony of hope, healing, and unconditional acceptance that would continue to transform lives for generations to come. The desert wind outside carried the sound of music through the open windows, out across the landscape, where a scared, abandoned boy had once sat alone. But that spot was no longer marked by sadness. Instead, it had become a beacon of hope, a place where different voices came together to create something extraordinary, proving that sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the places where we feel most broken. 5 years had passed since that first life-changing performance at the Central City Concert Hall. Thomas, now 15, sat in his wheelchair on the familiar stage, Papa Joe's guitar resting comfortably in his lap. The auditorium was filled with a new generation of young musicians, all gathered for the Foundation's annual celebration. "I remember sitting right where you are now," he began, addressing the eager faces before him, "wondering if I had anything worth sharing with the world, wondering if being different meant being less." His fingers found the opening notes of his mother's song, the melody that had started everything. The Elizabeth Parker Foundation had grown beyond anyone's wildest dreams. Centers like the one in the desert had sprung up across the country, each offering hope and healing through music. Jamie had graduated from music school and now ran the Foundation's educational programs. Michael's adaptive drumming techniques had revolutionized music therapy practices worldwide. But today's celebration was special for another reason. Sarah and Jim had suggested something unprecedented, a worldwide concert connecting all their centers through live streaming technology. Music Without Borders would showcase hundreds of young musicians playing together across time zones and distances. "When I first started playing this guitar," Thomas continued, running his hand along Papa Joe's instrument's worn surface, "I thought I was just finding my own voice, but what I discovered was that every voice matters, every story deserves to be heard, and every difference adds something unique to the world's symphony." The massive screens behind him lit up, showing faces from centers around the globe, children with various abilities, each one ready to add their voice to the collective performance. Richard Parker's tech division had developed new adaptive instruments that allowed musicians to play together despite physical distances or differences. "Today," Thomas announced, "we're going to perform a new piece. It's called The World Symphony, and it includes elements from every culture, every tradition, and every way of making music. Because that's what we've learned, that music doesn't discriminate. It only asks that we open our hearts and listen." Grace and Robert, their hair now silver, but their eyes still bright with pride, sat in the front row. Beside them, the Martinez family beamed. Sarah and Jim, Carlos now in college studying music education, and Maria pursuing a degree in adaptive technology design. Richard Parker sat with the Foundation's board, but his attention wasn't on administrative matters. He watched his son with quiet amazement, seeing not the child he had once rejected, but the young man who had transformed that rejection into a force for positive change. As Thomas began to play, other instruments joined in from screens around the world. Traditional instruments modified for different abilities merged with cutting-edge adaptive technology. A young girl in Tokyo played a breath-controlled synthesizer, while a boy in London used eye-tracking software to conduct his section of the orchestra. The music they created together transcended language, culture, and physical limitations. It spoke of triumph over adversity, of finding strength in difference, of the power of unconditional love to heal and transform. Mr. Rodriguez, who still taught at Pine Grove, but now also trained music teachers worldwide in adaptive techniques, watched from the wings. The scared boy who had first wheeled into his music room had become a beacon of hope for others, proving that music could build bridges across any divide. Jamie appeared on screen from the Desert Center, leading her own group of young musicians. The poem that had once expressed her isolation had become an anthem of inclusion, sung in multiple languages across their global network. As the piece reached its crescendo, Thomas looked out at the sea of faces, both in person and on screens, and saw his mother's dream manifested in ways she could never have imagined. Every child who had ever felt different or isolated could now find their place in this worldwide symphony. The performance ended with a moment of perfect harmony, hundreds of different voices, instruments, and abilities coming together in a final, triumphant chord. The applause that followed wasn't just in the concert hall, it echoed from centers around the world, a global celebration of music's power to unite and heal. After the performance, as families mingled and celebrated, Thomas wheeled to the edge of the stage where it had all begun. Sarah joined him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, recognizing his reflective mood. Thomas smiled, his fingers absently strumming Papa Joe's guitar. "About how everything can change in a moment. That day on the desert road, I thought it was the end, but it was really just the beginning of something amazing." The guitar's warm tones filled the quiet space between them, carrying the echoes of all the lives that had been touched, all the barriers that had been broken, all the music that had been unleashed into the world. Late that evening, after the global concerts had ended and the celebrations wound down, Thomas returned to the desert center. The building glowed softly in the twilight, its windows illuminated with the warm light that had guided so many children home to themselves. He wheeled along the familiar path to the exact spot where his father had left him years ago, but now, instead of emptiness and despair, the space was filled with purpose and hope. A small memorial garden bloomed there, desert flowers growing strong and beautiful in the challenging environment. "I thought I might find you here," came his father's voice. Richard Parker approached slowly, respecting the significance of the moment. Their relationship had evolved over the years into something neither of them could have predicted. Not the rigid bond his father had once demanded, but a genuine connection built on understanding and acceptance. "I was just thinking," Thomas said, gesturing to the garden, "about how things grow in the most unexpected places." Papa Joe's guitar rested in his lap, its surface catching the last rays of sunset. Richard sat on a nearby bench, designed to be accessible for all visitors. "Your mother used to say something similar. She believed that beauty could flourish anywhere if it was just given the chance to grow in its own way." Around them, the desert wind carried the lingering echoes of the day's music. The center would welcome a new group of students tomorrow, each one carrying their own stories of challenge and hope. The Elizabeth Parker Foundation had become more than a music therapy program. It was a movement, changing how the world saw ability and difference. Thomas began to play softly, his mother's melody merging with the desert sounds. As the music filled the air, he reflected on how far they had all come. The Martinez family had shown him what unconditional love looked like. Grace and Robert had connected him to his mother's legacy. His father had learned that perfection wasn't about meeting external standards, but about being authentically yourself. "You know what I've learned," Thomas said, his fingers still moving over the strings, "that sometimes the things that seem to break us actually break us open, let in the light, make room for new growth." Inside the center, the walls were lined with photographs, children discovering their musical voices, families finding hope, communities coming together. Each image told a story of transformation, of barriers overcome, of music's power to heal and unite. Sarah appeared in the garden's entrance, followed by the rest of their extended family. They gathered naturally around Thomas, each one a vital part of the symphony his life had become. Carlos and Maria, home from college, joined in with instruments of their own. The music that had once been a solitary comfort, now a shared celebration. "I have something to show you," Grace said, producing a worn envelope. "We found it in Elizabeth's last journal. It was meant for your 16th birthday, but I think now is the right time." Inside was a simple note, written in Elizabeth's flowing hand. "To my child, may you always know that your song matters. Your voice, exactly as it is, adds something precious to the world's music. Never stop playing, never stop growing, never stop believing in the beauty of who you are." As Thomas read his mother's words, his fingers found a new melody on Papa Joe's guitar. Not a song of loss or longing, but a celebration of everything that had grown from those difficult beginnings. One by one, the others joined in, creating an impromptu symphony under the desert stars. The music they made together spoke of family found in unexpected places, of love that transcended blood ties, of the strength that comes from embracing our differences. It spoke of a boy who had once sat alone in this very spot, not knowing that his darkest moment would lead to light for so many others. As the final notes faded into the desert night, Thomas looked at the faces around him. His two families, now woven into one tapestry, their differences creating a richer, more beautiful pattern than uniformity ever could. Papa Joe's guitar, which had started as a stranger's legacy, had become a bridge between past and future, between loss and hope, between silence and song. The Elizabeth Parker Center stood behind them, ready to welcome tomorrow's dreamers and musicians. Inside its walls, children would continue to discover their voices, prove that different didn't mean less, and add their unique notes to the world's endless symphony. And Thomas, who had once been told he didn't fit the Parker name, had created a legacy far greater than mere family reputation. He had shown that every voice matters, every story deserves to be heard, and every difference adds something precious to life's magnificent harmony. The desert wind carried their music out across the landscape, a reminder that even in the most unlikely places, with love, acceptance, and the courage to be yourself, something beautiful can grow. The song that had begun with a mother's love for her unborn child had blossomed into a worldwide symphony of hope, healing, and the endless possibilities that arise when we dare to embrace our authentic selves.